This one's actually insane. In 2010, 55-year-old Greg Flanagan was found dead on the floor inside of his locked hotel room in Texas. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery, as Greg's wallet was still in his back pocket with cash inside. He had suffered no obvious external injuries, but had massive internal damage, including broken ribs, damage to his liver and intestines, and a hole through his heart. Flanagan's death was soon ruled an unsolved homicide, despite coroners having no idea what actually happened to him. After an 8-month investigation, it was revealed that he died from a 1-in-a-million series of events. A drunk guest in the next hotel room accidentally fired a single bullet through the wall while playing with his pistol. While Flanagan was laying down watching Iron Man 2, the bullet hit him directly in the scrotum and continued up through his body and through his heart, likely killing him moments after he stood up and stumbled toward the door. Lance Moeller was later sentenced to 10 years in prison for his neighbor's bizarre accidental murder. For 300 years, the office of the Pope was almost certainly a death sentence. It's said that 28 out of the first 31 popes were murdered, many in violent ways. For example, ancient Roman authorities executed Saint Clement I by attaching an anchor to his neck and dropping him into the Black Sea. He would eventually become the patron saint of mariners. Tradition holds that an angry mob killed Pope Saint Calixtus by throwing him down a well. The well is still preserved at the Church of Santa Maria in Rome. Saint Sixtus II was celebrating Mass in the catacombs of San Callisto when Roman soldiers suddenly stormed in. The Pope was then decapitated along with 4 of his deacons right in front of his congregation. Pope Saint Pontian died of forced labor in mines after being exiled to Sardinia. He resigned the papacy, the first pope to do so, knowing there was no chance for him to return alive. It's widely rumored that Pope Paul II died of a heart attack in 1471 while being sodomized by a page boy. Legend has it that Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope in history, died after choking on a fly that flew into his mouth while he was drinking wine. On his deathbed in 1492, Innocent VIII's doctors reportedly tried to revive him by transfusing blood from 3 young boys. All 3 children reportedly died from the experiment, and the Pope died shortly afterwards. It's often cited as one of the first recorded and failed blood transfusions. Pope Saint Clement II died suddenly in 1047, just 1 year into his reign. Nearly 1,000 years later, in 1959, a medical exam of his body revealed dangerously high levels of lead, suggesting he was actually poisoned. And last but not least, considered by many to have been the worst pope in history, the reign of Pope John XII involved gambling with church funds, ordaining a child bishop, and allegedly toasting to the devil. It's widely believed that he either died of a stroke while having sex with a married woman or was beaten to death by her husband. Eminem's track Brain Damage was inspired by his real-life childhood bully, D'Angelo Bailey. In an interview, Bailey once boasted about beating Eminem so severely that it caused a concussion, bleeding from the ears, and temporary vision loss. In 2001, Bailey tried suing Eminem for slander over the song, but the case was thrown out by the judge, who delivered the ruling in the form of a rap. This photo from 1977 shows a Rhodesian soldier interrogating a group of captured rebels. The men had to hold this position until they talked, and the first one to fall would receive a bullet in the forehead. In 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area randomly dropped dead after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. The incident changed packaging laws forever, but the killer was never caught. In 2021, a 39-year-old man was reported missing in Barcelona. Days later, his rotting corpse was found stuck inside a papier-mâché dinosaur statue located outside of an abandoned movie theater. He'd somehow dropped his phone inside of the statue, crawled in to retrieve it, got stuck, and died upside down. Popes can't be organ donors because their body becomes property of the church once they die. This rule invalidated Pope Benedict's organ donor card, which he had held since the 1970s. This practice ensures the preservation of the body for potential future veneration, especially if the Pope is canonized as a saint. It's been long rumored that when a Pope dies, it's tradition to hit him on the head with a silver hammer to ensure that he's actually dead and not just sleeping. In 897, Pope Stephen VI had his dead predecessor Pope Formosus dug up, dressed in papal robes, and put on trial. They propped his corpse on a throne, screamed at it, found him guilty, severed 3 of his fingers, and threw his body in the river. The public was so horrified by the grotesque trial that Stephen VI was soon imprisoned and strangled to death. When Pope Pius XII died, his embalming was so poorly botched that his body began to rot and blow almost immediately. During the public viewing, his nose fell off. and his body reportedly exploded from gas buildup inside of the casket due to blistering heat. In 1981, a Turkish man shot Pope John Paul II 4 times but didn't kill him. After the Pope recovered, he visited the assassin in prison and gave him his forgiveness. The assassin was soon pardoned at the Pope's request, and 33 years after his crime, he visited the Vatican and laid flowers on the Pope's tomb. In July of 1518, a French woman ran from her house and started dancing fervently in the street. Within a week, a few dozen others had joined her, and by the next month, hundreds fell victim to this dancing plague. They danced completely uncontrollably and seemingly without reason, often for days on end, until they collapsed from exhaustion or even died from heart attacks or strokes. Up to 400 people in total died before the phenomenon suddenly stopped. It's widely believed that the dancing plague was caused by stress-induced hysteria or poisoning from a wheat fungus called ergot. Known for playing Donna's mom in That 70s Show, actress Tanya Roberts died from a severe UTI that advanced to sepsis and multi-organ failure. She first noticed the pain while out hiking one day and decided to sleep it off. But the next morning, Roberts fell out of bed in severe pain and couldn't get back up. She was quickly rushed to the hospital where she ended up dying 2 weeks later. In 2022, a 71-year-old cyclist named William Hosch was struck by an ambulance while riding his bike in Oregon, causing multiple injuries including a fractured nose. The same ambulance brought him to the hospital but later followed up with a bill for $1,800 for the ride. Hosch has since filed a lawsuit seeking just under $1 million. After a night out in 2016, 23-year-old Royal Air Force gunner Corey McKeague suddenly vanished. Security footage showed him entering a street but never showed him exiting. Police eventually concluded that he fell asleep in a garbage bin and was crushed to death by a garbage truck. Corey's body was never found. In 2007, a 21-year-old man named Ben Carpenter, who suffers from muscular dystrophy, was pushed by a semi-truck for 4 miles after his wheelchair got stuck in the grill. Thankfully, officers heading in the opposite direction noticed the terrifying situation and stopped the driver before things got serious. Ben miraculously escaped without a scratch on him, but was traumatized by the incident. When Blackbeard blockaded Charleston Harbor in 1718, he wasn't seeking gold, but instead demanded mercury. Up until the 20th century, it was widely believed that injecting mercury into the urethra was a cure for syphilis. After a long stay in the brothels of Barbados, most of the men in Blackbeard's fleet were infested with STDs. Thus, Blackbeard captured Charleston Harbor to try and make his male parts feel better. The first ever reliable pregnancy test involved injecting a woman's urine into the skin of a female African clawed frog. If the woman was pregnant, the frog would lay eggs within a few hours. William the Conqueror smashed his nuts so hard on his horse's saddle that it gave him an awful infection which he died from a few weeks later. Priests later tried to force his body into a stone coffin that was far too small, causing his corpse to effectively explode. In the 19th century, doctors would perform pelvic massages to treat hysteria in women. Essentially, women would be finger-banged until they reached hysterical paroxysm, aka climax. But these treatments were often time-consuming and gave many doctors carpal tunnel, thus the vibrator was born. Morbid facts. Known as the girl who can't feel pain, Ashlyn Blocker was born with a congenital insensitivity to pain, a rare condition characterized by her body's inability to experience physical pain. While it may sound like a superpower, this condition has left Ashlyn without the natural warning signals that typically alert people to danger. From a young age, she accidentally injured herself countless times, forcing her parents to be constantly vigilant to prevent serious harm. In one case, she ran on a badly fractured ankle for several days before her parents finally realized that something was wrong. Here's a 1955 photo of actor James Dean pretending to sleep inside of an open casket at a furniture store in Indiana. After a fatal car crash just 7 months later, Dean would end up laying in a casket permanently. Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother Alberta was also murdered 6 years after her son was assassinated. She was shot and killed by a 23-year-old black man who thought that black civil rights activists and ministers were evil. The man yelled, "You are serving a false god," and shot Alberta King with 2 handguns while she was playing an organ during a church service in Atlanta. The rarest ways to die. 2 years ago, 72-year-old Lillian Curtis pulled into a Denny's parking lot in Kentucky when a strong gust of wind suddenly knocked the Denny's sign over. It fell directly onto her car and crushed her, causing her to eventually die from blunt force injuries. In 1989, a Soviet jet fighter pilot mistakenly ejected just after takeoff from Poland. The aircraft continued flying for more than 500 miles on autopilot and ended up all the way in Belgium, only to crash into a house, killing a teenager. In the year 2000, 11-year-old Candace Newmaker died during an extreme therapy session in Colorado. The adopted girl was undergoing attachment therapy when 4 unlicensed therapists decided to perform the controversial treatment known as rebirthing. She was wrapped in a flannel sheet and covered with pillows to represent a womb and was told to fight her way out of it, with the apparent expectation that this would help her attach to her adoptive mother. All 4 therapists used their body weight to push down on Candace and resist her attempts to free herself. Candace screamed several times that she couldn't breathe and was gonna die, and even started to vomit, but was simply called a quitter by one of the therapists. 40 minutes into the session, Candace was asked if she was ready to be reborn, to which she faintly responded no, which would be her last word before she died of asphyxiation. All 4 fake therapists were prosecuted, 2 of whom were sentenced to 16 years in prison after the disturbing footage was shown in court. In 2016, fitness instructor Missy Beavers was beaten to death while setting up for a class inside a Texas church. The case gained national attention after security footage showed a person wearing police tactical gear walking through the church and opening various doors. Police are certain this was Missy's killer, but he or she was never identified. Here are some lovely photos of Colombian drug lord Griselda Blanco with her son Michael. Blanco ordered a hit on her 3rd husband Dario, who was killed by a gunman inside his car while Michael was sitting next to him. It's estimated that Griselda was responsible for at least 200 murders while transporting cocaine to the U.S. In 1986, California cop Craig Payer pulled over college student Kara Knott before beating her with his flashlight and strangling her. The officer was interviewed by the news during coverage of the murder investigation, and scratches that were inflicted by Knott could be seen on his face. Payer was soon found guilty of her murder. RFK Jr.'s gravelly speaking voice is caused by a rare neurological condition he developed in his early 40s called spasmodic dysphonia, which causes the muscles that open and close the vocal cords to spasm involuntarily. Here's what he used to sound like before this condition versus after.
And if somebody dumps something into the river that's poison, and it goes into a drinking water intake, and children drink that drinking water, that is child abuse.
I think those vaccines we need to have, again, true double-blind placebo-controlled trials on that. There's 25% of Americans.
While the true cause is unknown, people who do a lot of public speaking are far more likely to develop this condition. RFK required a titanium bridge in his vocal folds to be able to speak at all, and receives Botox shots in his vocal cords every 4 months. He says it's painful to hear himself speak and feels sorry for those who have to listen to him. Ariana Grande reportedly has a longtime stalker named Paige Neiman who tries to impersonate the famous singer. She's been obsessed with Grande since she was 12 years old, and has allegedly undergone several plastic surgeries to look like her despite being only 20 years old. When the Titanic sank, the richest passenger on board was business mogul John Jacob Astor IV, who had enough money in his bank account to build 30 Titanics. He ended up giving up his spot in the final lifeboat to instead save the lives of a random woman and her daughter. These were the last photos of Garrett Miller, taken just minutes before a soccer goalpost tipped over and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. In 2016, Texas father Daniel Shaver was held up by police after he was seen pointing a pellet gun out of his hotel window. Several officers had rifles pointed at Schaefer in the hallway as he attempted to comply with them, but their commands were confusing and contradictory, especially since Shaver was drunk. For example, they told Shaver not to put his hands down for any reason before telling him to start crawling towards them. As Shaver was crawling and begging for his life, he reached back to pull his pants up and was killed instantly by Officer Philip Brailsford, who later claimed he thought Shaver was reaching for a weapon. In 2015, Denise Huskins was kidnapped from her boyfriend's California home by a masked intruder before being held for ransom. She was taken to a remote location where she was blindfolded, drugged, and raped multiple times over the next 2 days. When Denise was suddenly released, police accused her of faking the entire story like a scene straight out of Gone Girl. They mocked her during press conferences and labeled her as mentally unstable, until evidence finally surfaced proving that everything she'd said was true. Her kidnapper turned out to be a former Harvard-educated lawyer who had a history of stalking couples. This still frame is from the Collateral Murder video released by WikiLeaks, captured moments before U.S. Apache helicopter pilots opened fire on local civilians and journalists in Baghdad 2007. The footage, which includes audio of the pilots making casual jokes during the attack, was leaked by whistleblower Chelsea Manning, who was subsequently sentenced to 35 years in prison, though this sentence was later commuted. No charges were ever filed against the military personnel involved in the incident. This has to be the strangest disorder I've ever heard of by far. Body integrity identity disorder is a rare neurological condition that causes the patient to believe that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them. This sense of disconnection often begins in early childhood, with sufferers reporting an intense and persistent desire to remove or disable the offending limb. Some patients become so distressed that they attempt self-amputation, using power tools, shotguns, or dry ice to damage the limb beyond repair. Renowned cricket historian Roland Bowen famously severed his own leg in 1968 while suffering from this disorder, and in the late 90s, Scottish surgeon Robert Smith controversially performed amputations on healthy patients who begged him to cut off one of their limbs. In many of these cases, patients report an indescribable sense of relief and psychological alignment following the removal of the unwanted limb. For them, the amputation is not a loss, but a long-sought correction in the harmony between their physical form and internal identity. After Drew Barrymore posed nude for a 1995 issue of Playboy at age 19, her godfather Steven Spielberg had a response for her. For Drew's 20th birthday, he sent her a quilt with the words "Cover Up" stitched on it. He also included a copy of the magazine with her photos altered by his art department to make her appear fully clothed. In 1828, American artist Sarah Goodridge painted a miniature portrait of her own breasts and sent it to a man she liked. It's considered by historians to be one of the earliest cases of someone sending nudes. After Rasputin's dramatic murder in 1916, it was rumored that his beef bayonet had been severed, preserved, and worshipped by a group of female devotees who claimed it could cure infertility with a single touch. Decades later, a Russian museum began displaying a preserved phallic object in a jar, claiming it was Rasputin's 11-inch Manaconda. The item became famous, but many experts dismissed it as a hoax, most likely a sea cucumber or animal organ. The item is still on display at a sex museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. In 1988, Hawaiian musician Israel Kana'i Kamakavivole called the owner of a recording studio at 3 a.m. when he was so eager to record his new idea. Despite having obviously closed for the night, the studio owner agreed since Israel was such a nice guy. Within 15 minutes, they recorded his ukulele rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow in just one take. Sadly, Israel struggled with morbid obesity throughout his life, at one point weighing over 750 pounds. After enduring several hospitalizations due to respiratory and cardiac issues, the legend would end up dying of respiratory failure at the young age of 38. Morbid facts. In 1978, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen hosted a party in their New York City hotel room, the morning after which Nancy was found dead in the bathroom with a single stab wound to her abdomen. Despite being comatose on drugs the entire night and having zero recollection, Vicious admitted to the stabbing and was charged with her murder. Many believe that Nancy was actually killed by a drug dealer who was attempting to rob the drugged-up couple, and that Vicious was totally incapable of harming her considering the state he was in. But the bass player ended up dying of a drug overdose while out on bail before he could stand trial, and the case was closed. In 1996, Maryland woman Sharon Lopatko was killed in a bizarre case of consensual homicide. She had emailed dozens of men asking them to torture and kill her for mutual sexual gratification, before meeting a man named Robert Glass who would follow through with her request. One morning, Sharon left her husband a note saying she would never return and told him not to track down her killer. Glass ended up strangling her to death and was soon arrested after police found the emails and discovered Sharon's body on his property. He admitted to fulfilling her torture fantasy, but also maintained that her death was an accident. Glass pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years before dying of a heart attack while in prison. Basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain once claimed that he slept with over 20,000 women, averaging 1.4 women per day for over 40 years. He also admitted that he preferred group sex because he found it far more efficient. While many have questioned the accuracy or practicality of the claim, Wilt stood by it until the day he died, not to brag but to illustrate the emptiness of such a lifestyle, later stating that he would have felt far more fulfilled by deeply loving just one woman. After leaving the hit sitcom Different Strokes and struggling to find success as an adult actress, Dana Plato spiraled into addiction, poverty, and run-ins with the law. In 1991, Dana entered a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun and demanded all the money in the cash register, after which the flabbergasted clerk called 911 saying, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Different Strokes." Dana soon lost custody of her only child, was caught forging prescriptions, and attempted to salvage her career by posing for Playboy, but found little redemption. By 1999, she was a faded star clinging desperately to the hope of a comeback, but her appearance on The Howard Stern Show turned into a public humiliation. Stern and his callers openly mocked her claims of being sober for 10 years, with some cruelly suggesting she was just moments away from another downfall. Within 24 hours of the interview, Dana died alone from an overdose of prescription pills at the young age of 34. In 1918, Austrian artist Oskar Kokoschka commissioned a life-size doll of the love of his life Alma Mahler after the end of their affair. He requested that it be constructed with swan skin with the feathers still attached, and stuffed with sawdust, cotton wool, and horsehair to mimic the softness of flesh. He even asked for anatomically accurate features, including a mouth with teeth and a tongue, and specified that the doll's intimate parts be perfect and luxuriant. The result was apparently so lifelike and disturbing that Kokoschka's butler suffered a stroke immediately upon seeing it. It's illegal to save baby sea turtles from predators if you don't have a permit. So if you ever see this happening before your eyes, you must let nature take its course unless you're willing to risk jail time. Morbid facts. Earlier this year, 21-year-old Texas woman Juniper Bryson was charged with attempting to sell her newborn baby on Facebook. She agreed to sell her newborn to the highest bidder, but was only hoping for $200. Bryson was messaged by various people and told them she just needed enough money to pay for her DoorDash food and to move into a new apartment. She was reported to police by a couple she blocked on Facebook for asking if they could adopt her baby the legal way. Studies have shown that obese drivers are 80% more likely to die in a car accident than drivers who are not overweight. Earlier this year, 2 Brazilian influencers drowned during a yacht party after the boat was capsized by a massive wave. The women likely would have survived the tragedy had they worn life jackets, but reportedly didn't want to ruin their tans in selfies. If you were to remove all the blood vessels in your body and tie them together, they would stretch across the entire circumference of the earth 2 to 4 times. In 2023, a woman's leg became trapped at the end of a movable walkway at an airport in Thailand. Her leg was so deeply stuck that emergency crews had no choice but to amputate it below the knee in order to free her. She was quickly rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors were unable to reattach her leg. In 1991, 11-year-old California girl J.C. Duggard was abducted by convicted sex offender Philip Garrido while waiting for her school bus. Garrido kept J.C. handcuffed in various tents and sheds that he built in his backyard where he would consistently abuse her. 7 months into her captivity, Garrido introduced J.C. to his wife Nancy, who brought the child a stuffed animal and chocolate milk while tearfully apologizing to her, but did nothing to free her. Instead, she helped her husband manipulate the young girl, at one point giving her 2 kittens before later taking them away. JC was eventually forced to bear a daughter at age 14 and another at 17, though she was never allowed to see a doctor. She remained missing for 18 years until a parole officer finally discovered her while investigating Garrido. He was sentenced to 431 years in prison, while his wife received 36 years to life. The state of California eventually awarded the Duggard family $20 million for its mishandling of the case. In 1960, 12-year-old Howard Doley was given an unnecessary lobotomy because his stepmother wasn't able to handle a normal preteen boy. She took him to several doctors who said Howard was perfectly healthy and blamed his questionable behavior on her bad parenting. That was until Dr. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized the lobotomy, diagnosed him with schizophrenia and offered to scramble his brain. It took Howard decades to recover from the barbaric procedure, spending years of his life in institutions, prisons, as a homeless person, and an alcoholic. Howard eventually earned a college degree and wrote several memoirs about his lobotomy. In 2009, the body of a man with graying hair was found washed up on a beach in Sligo, Ireland. He'd been checked into a nearby hotel under the name Peter Bergman, and his movements were captured on security cameras throughout the town, but aside from this, very little is known about the man. He was found with most of his clothes left behind on the shore, with no wallet, money, or form of ID. It's not even clear how he died since there was no evidence of drowning or foul play, but the post-mortem showed that he had advanced stages of prostate cancer and bone tumors and was likely in significant pain before he died. One thing that's for certain is that the man traveled extensively to erase all evidence of his existence, as he still remains unidentified to this day. Morbid facts. A 71-year-old man from Africa has lived in total isolation for 55 years to stay away from women. At the age of 16, he locked himself into a home secured by a 15-foot fence to avoid any possible interactions with females. He reportedly suffers from gynophobia, an irrational fear of women. A 26-year-old mum from the UK has died after traveling to Turkey for a Brazilian butt lift. The official cause of death was a fat embolism after some of the injected fat apparently entered her bloodstream. Many health professionals consider BBLs to be barbaric procedures because of the significant health risks associated with them that are seldom discussed. This is why you should never trust a pair of twins. In 2008, Swedish identical twins Ursula and Sabina Eriksson suddenly sprinted into oncoming traffic on the M6 motorway in London. Ursula was struck by a truck and Sabina by a car, yet both miraculously survived. But as paramedics tended to them, they both violently resisted help, with Sabina screaming, "They're going to steal your organs." She then punched a baffled officer and tried to run into traffic again. Ursula was hospitalized, but Sabina was released the next day despite continued erratic behavior. Just hours later, Sabina encountered a man who kindly offered food and a place to stay, only for Sabina to stab him to death the next day before jumping off a bridge while fleeing from police. Despite fracturing her skull, she survived yet again and was later sentenced to 5 years for manslaughter. There was no evidence that drugs or alcohol was involved in their sudden strange behavior, as the incidents have been chalked up to an episode of shared psychosis. Mary Bell was only 10 years old when she committed 2 shocking murders in 1968, making her one of the youngest known child killers in modern history. Raised in a violently abusive home in Newcastle, England, Mary first killed 4-year-old Martin Brown by strangulation after telling him his neck looked sore and offering to massage it. She then returned to the scene days later to leave taunting notes saying that she would kill again. 2 months later, she murdered 3-year-old Brian Howe in the same way, not only strangling him but also mutilating his body with scissors and carving the letter M into his stomach. Along with her 13-year-old accomplice Norma Bell, Mary was arrested and showed no remorse during her interrogation. In court, she was only convicted of manslaughter due to her young age and served 12 years in prison before being released with a new identity. Mary and her daughter were granted lifelong anonymity by the court as her current whereabouts are unknown. During McLovin's sex scene in Superbad, actor Christopher Mintz-Plasse had to have his mother present while filming due to legal requirements. The actor was only 17 years old at the time of filming, and California law mandates that a parent or guardian must be on set when a minor is involved in scenes of sexual nature. The U.S. Navy once banned tattoos it considered obscene, leading to a boom of tattoos of nude women on men who didn't want to serve. If they decided to serve later on, they had to have a tattoo artist dress the woman to meet Navy requirements. In 1999, Disney had to recall 3.4 million copies of the children's film The Rescuers because one of the animators inserted a picture of a nude woman into 2 frames of the movie. During the Apollo missions, NASA provided male astronauts with condom-like urination devices available in small, medium, and large sizes. However, due to apparent concerns about personal image, many astronauts opted for the largest size, leading to improper fits and urine leakage. To address this, NASA engineers humorously relabeled the sizes as large, gigantic, and humongous to encourage astronauts to choose the appropriate size. Director Brad Bird was inspired to make The Iron Giant after his sister Susan was shot and killed by her husband. His pitch was, what if a gun had a soul and didn't want to be a gun? Winslow's soothing syrup was a popular medicine used in the early 1900s to put infants to sleep. It took 20 years of doctors' complaints before it was finally pulled from shelves for killing thousands of babies. Its main active ingredient was morphine. Here are some morbid facts about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Even though she was completely healthy, Dee Dee Blanchard claimed that her daughter suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, sleep apnea, seeing and hearing problems, asthma, seizures, and brain damage that gave her the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. The healthy girl was forced to stay in a wheelchair, fed through a feeding tube, and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved Gypsy's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever doctors began catching on to the fact that Dee Dee was completely lying, she would immediately switch to a new one. This is a photo of Dee Dee's medicine cabinet for Gypsy, showing how much unnecessary medicine and supplements she would poison her daughter with each day. On one occasion, Gypsy attempted to run away from home but was soon caught by her mother. Dee Dee then proceeded to smash Gypsy's phone and computer with a hammer, and threatened to smash her fingers next if she ever tried to escape again. After the incident, she kept Gypsy leashed and handcuffed to her bed. Dee Dee would apply a numbing agent to Gypsy's gums before doctor's appointments, which would cause excessive salivation and eventually convince doctors to completely remove Gypsy's salivary glands in a major surgery. This, coupled with side effects from unnecessary seizure medication, caused all of Gypsy's teeth to fall out. Here are some morbid facts about Dee Dee Blanchard. Immediately after she was murdered, Dee Dee Blanchard was praised as a beautiful, endlessly giving woman who selflessly dedicated her entire life in service of her debilitated daughter. But this image would quickly fade once it was revealed that Dee Dee was actually a massive con artist who suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a classified mental disorder in which a caretaker makes someone appear ill to receive attention. And her abuse wasn't limited to just Gypsy. For starters, she was a full-on predator considering she got pregnant within 1 year of dating a 17-year-old boy when she was 24. Her stepmother Laura claims that Dee Dee once poisoned her food with Roundup weed killer, causing an extensive stay in the hospital. Other relatives believe that she may have also starved her own biological mother to death. When Dee Dee was murdered, her father and stepmother refused to pay for her funeral and ended up flushing her ashes down the toilet, saying she got what she deserved. Morbid facts. In 2019, a Brazilian gang leader tried escaping from his 73-year prison sentence by disguising himself as his teenage daughter who was visiting. He planned on leaving her behind in his place, but the guards weren't fooled by his disguise and stopped him at the exit. In 1992, Greg Austin Gingrich lost his life in the Grand Canyon after pretending to fall to his death. In the middle of the joke, he lost his footing and actually fell. In 1704, Sir Isaac Newton predicted that the world as we know it would end around the year 2060. He believed that humanity would then progress into an era of divinely inspired peace. In 2004, Peter Porco was struck in the head 16 times with an axe while he was asleep. But he miraculously woke up the next morning, made breakfast and coffee for himself, and then finally dropped dead while picking up his newspaper. He'd been completely unaware of his battered state and the pools of blood all around him. After 9/11, NFL safety Pat Tillman turned down a multi-million-dollar contract with the Cardinals to instead join the U.S. Army. He served several combat tours in the Army Rangers before he was tragically killed in the mountains of Afghanistan. Prior to his death, Tillman called the invasion and occupation of Iraq effing illegal. Initially, the Army reported that Tillman had been killed by enemy fire, but in 2004, the Pentagon notified the Tillman family that he was actually killed by friendly fire from his own side. Actor Michael Berryman was born with ectodermal dysplasia, a rare genetic disorder that left him without hair, fingernails, or sweat glands, stripping him of the body's natural ability to regulate temperature. His striking appearance made him a fixture in horror films, most notably in The Hills Have Eyes, which became a life-threatening ordeal to film. Shot in the Mojave Desert, Berryman was forced to endure heavy costumes and layers of makeup under a merciless sun, all while his body lacked the ability to sweat or cool itself. He later described the experience as grueling and admitted that without strict precautions from the crew, he could have easily collapsed and died from heat stroke during the production. For years, Ray Brent Marsh, operator of the Tri-State Crematory in Georgia, failed to cremate hundreds of bodies entrusted to him. Instead, he left 339 corpses scattered in the woods, stuffed into sheds, or piled into vaults. Some decayed beyond recognition, others mummified or still in body bags, bloated and oozing fluids as the stench reportedly spread for miles. Families were unknowingly given cement powder, sawdust, or crushed concrete in urns, led to believe it was the ashes of their loved ones. Marsh claimed the cremation machine was broken, but it was fully functional, leading to him giving bizarre shifting excuses, such as the claim that he actually opposed cremation. He eventually pleaded guilty to nearly 800 charges and spent 12 years in prison. While filming The 7-Year Itch in 1954, a crowd of over 1,500 New Yorkers swarmed 51st Street to witness Marilyn Monroe's now iconic skirt-blowing scene. As her white dress billowed up with each gust from the subway grate, Onlookers reportedly shouted, "Higher, higher," turning the shoot into a public spectacle. Monroe's possessively abusive husband, Joe DiMaggio, was reportedly furious over the display. That night, he physically assaulted her so violently that she filed for divorce just 3 weeks later, citing mental cruelty as the reason. Just recently, American YouTuber Mikhailo Polyakov was arrested after illegally traveling to North Sentinel Island, home to an uncontacted and highly vulnerable tribe protected by Indian law. Known for his danger tourism stunts, Polyakov used a dinghy and GPS to reach the Forbidden Island, where he left a coconut and a can of Diet Coke as offerings while he recorded the encounter. His actions violated strict laws banning all contact with the Sentinelese to prevent disease exposure and cultural disruption. It was his third attempt to approach the violent tribe, and he now faces up to 5 years in prison amid widespread outrage over his idiotic stunt. Facts about Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson once paid a witch doctor $150,000 to put a curse on Steven Spielberg. The expensive ritual involved the slaughtering of dozens of animals, including 42 cows, all because Spielberg didn't give Michael the role of Peter Pan in his 1991 film Hook. The director had previously promised Michael the part, but decided to make the movie a comedy instead of a musical and went with Robin Williams instead. This was devastating for Michael, since he famously had an obsession with Peter Pan and the idea of never growing up. In 1988, Michael purchased a private amusement park that he would name Neverland Ranch and live at for 25 years. He invited children from all over the world to his home, typically as charitable events for kids in need. But in 2003, Michael was charged with multiple counts of essaying a minor, and Neverland Ranch was searched extensively by police. Despite being acquitted of all charges 2 years later, Michael never returned to his home. Never tell me the odds. While filming the first fight scene in the movie Troy, in which he played mythological hero Achilles, Brad Pitt ruptured his Achilles tendon. The ironic injury halted filming for several weeks while the actor recovered. In 1971, Edwin Robinson from Maine suddenly went blind and nearly deaf after a truck accident. But 9 years later, he was struck by lightning in his backyard, and his vision and hearing were both miraculously restored. Legendary authors C.S. Lewis and Aldous Huxley both died on November 22, 1963, but their deaths were overshadowed by a far more noteworthy death that occurred on that same day: the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. In 2021, a Canadian woman was asleep in her bed when she was suddenly awoken by an explosive bang from her ceiling. She jumped out of bed and turned on the light, discovering a meteorite nestled between her pillows. She was inches away from becoming only the second person in recorded history to be struck by a meteorite, and likely would have been the first to be killed by one. Morbid facts. In the 1990s, nerdy college student Dustin Honkin decided to use his newfound knowledge to become a crystal meth kingpin. He made boatloads of cash and was willing to do anything to protect his business. At one point, he murdered an entire family of 5, including 2 little girls, all in an effort to protect his criminal enterprise. He was eventually caught and executed by the state of Iowa just a few years ago. In 2006, 27-year-old Ohio State medical student Brian Schaefer entered a bar with some friends. After security cams recorded him entering through the bar's only public entrance, Schaefer was never seen exiting the bar and has not been seen nor heard from since. In 1981, a Turkish man shot Pope John Paul II 4 times but didn't kill him. After the Pope recovered, he visited the assassin in prison and gave him his forgiveness before pardoning him. 33 years after his crime, the man visited the Vatican and laid flowers on the Pope's tomb. Morbid facts. In 2016, an Egypt air flight to Cairo was hijacked by a man wearing an explosive vest. While the other passengers were fearing for their lives, 27-year-old British man Ben Inez approached the terrorist and requested a selfie. Although slightly bewildered, the hijacker had no problem with him taking it. Ben later reasoned that if the bomb turned out to be real, he would have nothing to lose anyway. Thankfully, the bomb turned out to be fake and the man was apprehended. Nicknamed the Great Impostor, Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. impersonated a civil engineer, a sheriff's deputy, a lawyer, a monk, a child care expert, a prison warden, a psychologist, a teacher, a cancer researcher, a doctor, and many more. But perhaps his greatest act was when he pretended to be a naval surgeon during the Korean War. He had no prior medical knowledge but possessed a photographic memory and was able to memorize an entire textbook. He performed 19 successful surgeries before being exposed as an imposter. Never tell me the odds. In 2008, diver Mike DeMar was on vacation in Florida when he decided to test out his metal detector for the first time. The stars aligned when Mike stumbled upon a rare golden chalice, an artifact he initially thought was junk. After visiting an appraiser, Mike discovered that the chalice was worth over $1.3 million. Historians say it's just over 400 years old and probably came from a ship called the Santa Margarita, which sank off the coast of Key Largo in 1622. A pair of Dutch short track skaters finished a race so closely that it was impossible to pick a winner. They both finished with a time of 43.128 seconds, so they ended up sharing the gold. Morbid facts. Russian scientist Anatoly Bugorsky worked as a physicist on the largest particle accelerator in the Soviet Union. In 1978, he was checking a malfunctioning piece of equipment when one of the safety mechanisms failed, causing a high-energy proton beam to pass directly through his head. He reportedly saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, but didn't feel any pain. The beam had burned through parts of his skin, bone, and the brain tissue underneath, causing the left half of his face to swell up beyond recognition. Since it was believed that he received far more than a fatal dose of radiation, Bugorsky was taken to a clinic in Moscow where doctors could document his certain death. But miraculously, Bugorsky survived, completed his PhD, and continued working as a particle physicist. Nearly 50 years later, he's still alive to this day with relatively minor symptoms. This is the skull of a young girl whose remains were found in the trash deposit of a Jamestown fort building in 2013. As evidenced by the butchery marks seen on her forehead, she was believed to be the victim of cannibalism at the Jonestown colony in the winter of 1609. Known as the starving time, this period was marked by extreme desperation when it came to finding food due to a severe drought. The governor of Jamestown, George Percy, wrote that colonists ate horses, dogs, cats, vermin, and even dug up corpses from graves to consume. In one case, he reported that a man killed his pregnant wife, butchered her, preserved her with salt, and consumed her. Only 61 out of the original 500 colonists managed to survive the brutal winter. Morbid facts. While investigating the illegal shark fin trade for the BBC special Gordon Sharkbait in 2011, Gordon Ramsay and his crew were attacked by a group of men linked to drug networks in Costa Rica. They were held at gunpoint, doused with petrol, and told they would be killed if they continued filming. The shark fin trade continues to flourish to this day due to the high demand of shark fin soup, resulting in about 100 million sharks being killed every year. This was the obituary of Kathleen Demlow, who doesn't appear to be missed by her family. Here's a photo of Barbara Graham saying goodbye to her 2-year-old son Tommy before being executed via gas chamber in 1955. She was convicted for her part in the brutal murder of elderly widow Mabel Monahan during a home invasion gone wrong. Up until 2017, if you caught your spouse in bed with someone else in Uruguay, it was within your legal right to murder either one of them. While on vacation in Bulgaria in 2014, 28-year-old German man Lars Matank got into a bar fight that left him with a ruptured eardrum. He was unable to fly home with his friends due to the injuries, but told them he was totally fine and only planned on staying for a couple extra nights. However, the next day, Lars began acting paranoid. He called his mom and whispered that she should cancel his credit cards because someone was trying to kill him. Security cams in the hotel showed him pacing up and down the halls and peeking out the windows for several hours. After arriving at the airport the next day, Lars saw the airport doctor who gave him the okay to fly. But that's when Lars began shaking and suddenly yelled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He then got up and sprinted from the office, leaving behind all of his luggage, including his phone, wallet, and ID. Once outside, he was seen jogging from the airport, hopping a fence, and sprinting in the direction of a nearby forest. Lars would never be seen again. In 2017, British hairdresser Daryl Rowe was convicted of deliberately infecting 5 men with HIV. He would meet his victims through dating apps before sleeping with them, after which he would send them taunting messages telling them he lied about being HIV negative. Rowe ended up being sentenced to life imprisonment for his evil actions. In 1966, an 18-year-old man entered a beauty school in Arizona before shooting 7 people inside, killing 5 of them, including a toddler. When questioned about his motive, he said he simply did it to get his name out there. Doctor and philanthropist Patch Adams only agreed to the 1999 film about his life because the producers promised to help build his hospital. But none of the profits from the film were ever given to his foundation, and Adams himself said he hated the movie and everything it stood for. In 1955, a pregnant woman was scheduled for a C-section in Morocco, but she fled the hospital after watching another woman die during the procedure. She was in pain for a few days afterwards, but when the pain suddenly disappeared, she simply went on with her life. 46 years later, she was diagnosed with a tumor that turned out to be the calcified baby still inside of her. A woman from Turkey recently underwent surgery to have 35 olive pits, 28 date seeds, and 5 stones removed from her digestive tract. She was experiencing severe abdominal pain, leading to the discovery that she'd been swallowing various pits and seeds for decades. After narrowly avoiding death due to the complications, she's now vocal about urging people to never swallow large seeds. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, General Eisenhower was under so much stress that he'd been smoking 6 packs of cigarettes, drinking 24 cups of coffee, and averaging just 2 hours of sleep every day. In the 1950s, 3 campers were found dead at their campsite in Oregon without any sign of struggle. Investigators were stumped until they soon found a dead newt in the hunter's coffee pot. They likely died after drinking the coffee, since newts can produce a toxin that's 10,000 times more potent than cyanide. In 1986, Andres Martinez lost control of his tanker truck and crashed into a mountain pass in Spain. He and his wife died on impact, but their 10-year-old son Juan Pedro was nowhere to be seen. No sign or remains of him have ever been found to this day, as Interpol has called it the strangest missing person case in Europe. The founder of North Face, Douglas Tompkins, died from hypothermia after a kayaking accident in 2015. He'd been traveling with longtime friend and Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard in the mountains of Patagonia. In 1964, actor Peter Sellers inhaled some poppers before getting in bed with his wife. He was apparently trying to achieve the ultimate gasm, but instead suffered 8 heart attacks over a 3-hour span. In 1999, tobacco manufacturer Philip Morris tried convincing the government of the Czech Republic that smoking was highly beneficial to the country. They argued that more people would die earlier as a result of smoking, thus helping the government save millions on pensions, hospitals, and housing for the elderly. In 2010, Dr. Jacqueline Koterick tried breaking into her ex-boyfriend's home by climbing down his chimney. 3 days later, a house sitter discovered her decomposing body inside after she apparently died from mechanical asphyxia. In 2006, Ray Rivera vanished after receiving a sudden phone call and rushing out of his Baltimore home. Over a week later, his body was found in a locked conference room at the Belvedere Hotel, having somehow crashed through the roof from above. The hole he fell through was bizarrely placed, far too distant from any ledge to be reached by a typical jump, leading some to believe he may have been thrown off the roof or pushed from a higher level of the building. Even stranger, a cryptic note filled with movie references and secret society names was discovered taped behind his computer. The eerie case still remains officially unsolved. Just recently, paranormal investigator Dan Rivera was found dead in his hotel room while on the Devils on the Run tour in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Best known for touring with the infamous Annabelle doll from The Conjuring, the 54-year-old had spent years investigating haunted locations and was a prominent figure in the New England Society for Psychic Research. His sudden death with no signs of foul play has fueled eerie speculation, given his close proximity to one of the world's most notorious possessed objects. As of now, the cause of death remains unknown, as Rivera's mysterious end has only deepened the legend surrounding Annabelle. In Dante's Inferno, hell is divided into 9 circles, each one reserved for a specific sin. Today we take a tour of these 9 circles with real-life stories to match. Jean Meslier was a Catholic priest for 40 years, known for his extensive charity work and devotion. But after his death in 1729, a hidden 633-page manuscript revealed that he had secretly been an atheist the entire time. He admitted to becoming a priest only to please his parents, called religion a castle in the air, and condemned faith as a tool of oppression. Tamika Hargrave died while cheating on her husband with her car mechanic. They were getting it on inside of a closed garage while the car was still running and eventually passed out from carbon monoxide. Their unclothed bodies were later found by Tamika's husband. In 2004, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after doctors spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail and her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. Known as the Witch of Wall Street, Hetty Green was once the richest woman in America. but she became infamous for her overly obsessive frugality. She refused to pay for heat, medical care, or clean clothes. Her son's leg once had to be amputated because she delayed treatment while searching for a free clinic. Hetty eventually died from a stroke while arguing over the cost of skim milk. In 1982, South Korean police officer Woo Bum Khan went on one of the deadliest killing rampages in world history. After his girlfriend woke him up by swatting a fly that was on his chest, he armed himself with rifles, grenades, and a service revolver, then spent the entire night moving from village to village, posing as a cop while massacring civilians in their homes. He cut phone lines, lobbed grenades into houses, and shot entire families in their sleep. By dawn, 56 people were dead and dozens more were injured. As police closed in, he ended the fury by taking his own life. Jim Jones began as a fiery Christian preacher with a passion for social justice. But behind the scenes, he rejected the Bible, called himself the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Lenin, and claimed true salvation could only be achieved through him. In 1978, he led over 900 followers, including 300 children, to a remote jungle in Guyana where they were forced to take their own lives. Their bodies were found piled in rows with their faces blue and arms entwined, proof of what happens when a heretic convinces others that he's a god. Serial killer Richard Ramirez quite literally made violence his religion. Breaking into homes at random, he often restrained entire families and carried out horrifying acts in front of them, designed to mentally and physically destroy his victims in their final moments. In multiple cases, he forced his victims to swear allegiance to the devil before killing them, and left pentagrams drawn across walls and even carved into his victim's skin. In one case, the sadistic killer gouged out a woman's eyes while she was still breathing. His crimes weren't just brutal, they were ritualistic expressions of chaos, cruelty, and complete devotion to evil. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times while he was in prison, eventually forgiving him for killing her mother. When he got out on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave her a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she discovered the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's house and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while on the run from police. In the early 90s, Andrew Martinez became a bizarre campus icon at UC Berkeley for attending classes completely nude, claiming he was protesting what he saw as oppressive social norms. Nicknamed the Naked Guy, he was repeatedly arrested, eventually expelled, and banned from campus after the school changed its policies just to stop him. But behind the act was a deepening struggle with mental illness that was later diagnosed as schizophrenia. Over the next decade, his life unraveled into a cycle of homelessness, institutionalization, and jail time. In 2006, at just 33 years old, Martinez was found dead by in a Santa Clara jail cell. In 1965, 22-year-old Lester Eubanks brutally murdered 14-year-old Mary Ellen Diener after attempting to rape her behind a house near a laundromat, shooting her twice, going home to change, then returning to bludgeon her to death with a brick upon realizing she was still alive. He was sentenced to death, but in 1972, just 3 days before his scheduled execution, Lester's sentence was commuted when Ohio temporarily suspended the death penalty. Declared a model prisoner, Eubanks was granted a bizarre privilege the next year, an unsupervised Christmas shopping trip at a mall. At some point, he walked away and simply vanished, and has been on the run ever since. In January of 2024, 29-year-old Nolan Arbaugh became the first human to receive a Neuralink brain implant after being paralyzed in a diving accident. Though the surgery was celebrated as a milestone, things quickly unraveled. 85% of the device's threads retracted from his brain, crippling its function. Neuralink scrambled to deploy emergency software fixes just to keep it working, allowing Nolan to play chess and move a cursor with his thoughts. The surgery carried serious risks, including infection, brain damage, and long-term complications. Arbaugh's implant was never removed, and the company hasn't disclosed the full extent of its ongoing effects. Near San Diego in 2022, a man died after crashing his car into a parked vehicle while driving rather slowly. Apparently, the knife he was using to mix protein powder while driving was propelled into his neck by the force of his airbag being deployed. In 2020, a Kansas man died after being shot by his dog in a freak hunting accident. He was sitting in the front seat of his pickup truck when his dog stepped on the trigger of his rifle in the back seat. In 1909, George Spencer Millett died in a freak accident while running away from 6 girls trying to give him kisses on his 15th birthday. He tripped and fell on an ink eraser in his front pocket that stabbed him in the heart. In 2011, a 49-year-old Russian woman had a heart attack and was pronounced dead. A few days later, she woke up at her own wake and was so shocked that she screamed and had another heart attack, this time dying for real. Badasses of history. During the Sandy Hook school shooting in 2012, 27-year-old elementary teacher Vicky Soto died a hero while saving her students from the gunman. After hearing gunshots from outside, she quickly hid her first graders in the classroom closet and refused to hide herself. When the shooter came to her room, she told him that her students were in the gym, after which some of the kids ran from their hiding spots in a panic. The shooter opened fire, but Soto shielded the children with her body as they escaped, saving 11 young lives while sacrificing her own. Nicknamed the Saint of Auschwitz, Maximilian Kolbe was a Polish Catholic priest who offered to die in the place of a concentration camp prisoner who was condemned to die of starvation. After surviving for several weeks, Kolbe was eventually killed by an injection of acid. The man he sacrificed himself for lived on for another 50+ years and dedicated his life to telling Kolbe's story. In 1982, the Pope canonized Kolbe and declared him a martyr of charity. Morbid facts. Starting when his son Uday was only 11 years old, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein often took the boy to witness his enemies being brutally tortured. These experiences apparently had a profound impact on young Uday, who grew up to become far worse than his father. His own relatives and personal acquaintances were reportedly terrified of him, since Uday was known to grape, torture, and murder anyone who disappointed him. During a dinner party in 1981, Uday murdered his dad's personal valet by repeatedly stabbing him with a carving knife in front of dozens of horrified guests. In 1995, Uday went on a shooting rampage at another party after his uncle made fun of his speech impediment. The shooting left 6 bodyguards dead and his uncle seriously injured, prompting Saddam to set his son's luxury car collection on fire. Uday was also known to arrest and torture Iraqi Olympic athletes when they didn't win a medal. In 2003, Uday was finally killed by an American task force at the age of 39. After Harry Houdini's death, his will requested that all of his magic equipment be given to his brother Theodore, but on the condition that it be burned and destroyed upon Theodore's death. Instead, the equipment ended up in the Houdini Magical Hall of Fame, a museum that burned down in 1995, and all of the memorabilia was destroyed. These are some of the craziest ancient artifacts that people have discovered on their property. In 2020, an Argentinian farmer found 4 20,000-year-old fossilized glyptodons on his property. Glyptodons were an ancient species of armadillo that were roughly the size of a modern-day smart car. You may also remember them from the movie Ice Age. In 1992, a British man was using a metal detector to find a lost hammer on his farm. But instead, he stumbled upon one of the largest collections of ancient Roman coins in the world, worth over $5 million today. In 1965, a Ukrainian farmer dug up the lower jawbone of a mammoth. Further excavations revealed 4 huts that were made completely out of mammoth bones. The prehistoric shelters are estimated to be around 15,000 years old. In 1963, a Turkish man knocked down a wall in his home while making some renovations. Behind the wall, he found a cave-like room that led to a tunnel system with more ancient rooms. He had discovered the ancient underground city of Derinkuyu, built around 700 BC and once had a population of over 20,000 people. Morbid facts. Music producer Phil Spector is widely considered to be a musical genius for his work in the 1960s with bands like the Beatles. But his much darker side was unraveled in 2003 when he murdered actress Lana Clarkson with a single gunshot wound to the mouth. According to the prosecution, Spector had previously pulled a gun on 4 different women when they didn't accept his advances, and he apparently took it to the extreme in this case. Phil's second wife, Ronnie Bennett, also alleged that he imprisoned her in his California mansion and subjected her to years of abuse. She eventually had to escape by jumping out of a broken window and running away barefoot. Ronnie was forced to surrender custody of her children in their divorce, claiming that Spector threatened to hire a hitman to kill her if she didn't. Spector's 2 sons later alleged that their father kept them captive as children, and that they were forced to perform simulated intercourse with his girlfriend. Phil was eventually sentenced to 19 years in prison, where he ended up dying in 2021. Here are some morbid facts about the Church of Scientology. The wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige has not been seen since 2007. Multiple missing persons reports have been filed, but each time they've been closed within hours by the LAPD as unfounded. The same woman's mother was found dead in 1985 with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest and 1 to the head. Scientologist Lisa McPherson died after undergoing an introspection rundown at the church's headquarters in Florida. Her body was found to be severely dehydrated, underweight, and covered in hundreds of cockroach bites. Her death was officially ruled an accident. Cult leader Charles Manson tried out Scientology in the 1960s, but eventually declared it too crazy for him to continue. According to former Scientologist Leah Remini, John Travolta has been designated as a Kakan, meaning he's allowed to murder anyone he wants and the church will look the other way. Founder L. Ron Hubbard's own son was highly critical of Scientology and claimed black magic was its inner core. He once stated, "My father didn't worship Satan, he thought he was Satan." Morbid facts. The photo on the left is the last picture ever taken of Australian kayaker Andrew McCauley. He vanished in 2007 while trying to kayak the Tasman Sea, an extremely dangerous body of water with gnarly waves. His body was never found, but his broken kayak was, along with his camera's memory stick with this photo on it. Here's some morbidly wholesome facts about Johnny Depp. In 2007, Johnny Depp's daughter Lily Rose was hospitalized at age 7 after contracting a severe E. coli infection that resulted in kidney failure. She was in a children's hospital for 9 days and doctors weren't sure if she'd make it through. Once she recovered, in order to thank the hospital for taking care of her, Johnny dressed up as Jack Sparrow and read stories for all the kids at the hospital. Today, Johnny always travels with his Jack Sparrow costume so he can randomly visit children's hospitals while dressed in character. While filming for Sleepy Hollow, Johnny became very close with his co-star, a one-eyed horse named Goldeneye. When he heard the horse was gonna be euthanized after filming, Johnny didn't hesitate to adopt the horse himself. When the Imaginarium of Dr. Pistorius was only a third of the way through filming, lead actor Heath Ledger tragically passed away from a sleeping pill overdose. Along with Jude Law and Colin Farrell, Johnny Depp filled in for Heath Ledger's role and donated his entire wage to Heath's 4-year-old daughter. Here are some morbidly wholesome facts about Stephen Hawking. When Stephen was diagnosed with ALS in 1963, doctors said he had about 2.5 years to live. Fortunately, the disease progressed much slower than doctors expected, and Hawking lived to the age of 76 before dying in 2018. He's believed to be the longest living person ever with ALS at 55 years since diagnosis. Stephen's wife Jane was once given the option to take him off life support when he was placed in a medically induced coma, but she refused, and upon recovering, he finished writing A Brief History of Time. During an interview with Stephen, the cameraman yanked a cable that set off an alarm, and Hawking suddenly slumped forward. Worried they just killed him, everyone rushed over to Hawking to find him giggling at his own joke. The alarm was from an office computer losing power. The ashes of Stephen Hawking were buried between the graves of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin in a section of Westminster Abbey known as the Scientist's Corner. As a final tribute during the burial, the European Space Agency beamed recordings of Hawking's voice to the nearest black hole. Morbid facts. Sue Aikens survived a brutal grizzly bear attack that left both of her hips pulled out of their sockets and bite marks in her skull. She crawled back to her cabin, put a belt around her waist to keep her hips in place, then went back out to shoot the bear. Help finally arrived 10 days later and she made a full recovery. The antimony pill, or the everlasting pill, was used in the early 19th century for stomach relief. It was reusable after being pooped out, making it very enduring and cost-effective. Entire families would often use the same pills, which sometimes even went through multiple generations. A 4-year-old murder case was solved in 2008 when detectives noticed an arrested gang member's tattoos that depicted the entire crime scene. The tattoos show a chopper spraying bullets at a victim, and the arrested man's name was Choppa. Authorities said this was a confession of guilt, and the man was sentenced to 65 years in prison for first-degree murder. In 2008, a woman from China cut off her husband's beaver cleaver with scissors while he was sleeping, after he reportedly brought another woman home and requested a threesome. While the man was recovering from the surgery that reattached it, his wife cut it off again and threw it out the window. In 1989, Montana woman Patricia Meehan was driving on the wrong side of the highway and eventually crashed into another car. She emerged from her vehicle with a confused look on her face before climbing over a fence and staring back at the wreckage. Patricia stood there for a few moments before wandering into the open field behind her and disappearing into the night. despite hundreds of reported sightings of her in the months that followed, she hasn't been located to this day. Some investigators suspect Patricia suffered from amnesia as a result of head trauma, but the case remains unsolved. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage. In 1899, brothers George and Willie Muse were kidnapped from their farm in Virginia by a freak hunter when they were just little boys. Born with albinism, they were forced to perform in circuses for the next 25 years under the names the Sheep-Headed Cannibals and Ambassadors from Mars. They were often ordered to partake in disturbing acts such as biting the heads off of snakes or consuming raw meat in front of crowds. The brothers essentially worked as modern-day slaves until their mother found them working for the Ringling Brothers and successfully sued for their release. In 2002, German actor Gunther Kaufmann confessed to falling on his accountant during a fight and accidentally suffocating the man to death with his 260-pound body. The actor was subsequently sentenced to 15 years in prison as a result of the incident. But 3 years later, it was revealed that Kaufman was innocent and had only confessed to protect his dying wife, who had actually murdered the accountant. After a night of drinking in 2010, Michigan man Jeffrey Duthet was sleeping in his bed when his dog Kiko suddenly bit off his toe. When he went to the hospital, it turned out the toe had a bad infection that likely would have spread and killed Jerry if left untreated. Thus, the dog had saved his owner's life. In 1997, the Cat in the Hat Thanksgiving Day Parade float careened out of control due to high winds, knocking a lamppost into the head of Kathleen Carana, putting her in a month-long coma. She sued Macy's and the city for $395 million and ended up settling for an undisclosed amount in 2001. Kathleen eventually purchased a nice New York City apartment with the settlement money, but just 5 years later, Yankees pitcher Corey Lidle crashed his plane into her building and the engine ended up in her bedroom. Luckily, the crash happened just minutes before Kathleen was due to arrive home, but Lidle and his flight instructor were both killed while 21 others in the building were injured. Adding to the weirdness of this story, the flight instructor's friend was also supposed to be on this flight but got stuck in traffic and told them to leave without him. So he managed to escape death until just 1 month later when he was killed in a separate plane crash. 18-year-old student John Savage was spared during the Columbine Massacre in 1999. He was hiding underneath a table in the library as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were going around shooting random students. At one point, Harris aimed his gun at Savage and told him to identify himself. A friend of Klebold's, John showed his face and asked Klebold what he was doing. The shooter responded, "Oh, just killing people." Savage then asked if they were gonna kill him, to which Klebold responded no and told John to run out of the building, which he did. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Actor Gaten Matarazzo, who plays Dustin in Stranger Things, was born with a rare genetic condition called cleidocranial dysplasia, affecting the development of bones and teeth. The condition left him without collarbones, caused severe dental issues, and required multiple painful surgeries. He was initially rejected from acting roles due to his appearance and speech, as his future in entertainment looked quite grim until Stranger Things incorporated his condition into the character. In more severe cases, CCD can lead to skull malformations, fragile bones, and life-threatening complications. Gayton now uses his platform to raise awareness and support others living with the condition. Nanny Doss was a seemingly sweet, smiling woman who murdered at least 11 members of her own family between the 1920s and 50s. Her victims included 4 husbands, 2 children, her own mother, 2 sisters, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law, most of whom died mysteriously in their sleep or after sudden bouts of illness. Doss used arsenic-laced foods, poisoned drinks, and other subtle methods to kill, often collecting the insurance money of the victims after murdering them. When she was finally arrested in 1954, she giggled through her confessions, earning her the nickname the Giggling Granny. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. Cello player Mike Edwards was an original founding member of the band Electric Light Orchestra. Tragically, he died in 2010 when a massive hay bale rolled down a hillside and collided with his van. In 2008, a man from California injected cocaine into his arm and apparently thought he accidentally injected some air into his vein. So he quickly ran into a Denny's restaurant and attempted to amputate his own arm using a butter knife. Police eventually subdued the man with a taser and rushed him to the hospital as Denny's closed for the night. This 1968 photo shows South Vietnamese women and children just moments before they were killed in the My Lai massacre. Witnesses later stated that American troops tried tearing the blouse off the woman in back as her mother attempted to protect her. In 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips was kidnapped while he was asleep in his Wisconsin bedroom. He'd been abducted by 17-year-old Joseph Clark, a local boy who was obsessed with the sound of bones breaking. Over 48 grueling hours, Clark broke both of the boy's hips, legs, shins, and ankles with his bare hands. Phillips eventually managed to escape from the nightmare and reported Clark to police. Sometime later, Phillips was sitting at home awaiting the trial when one of Clark's friends rang the doorbell and shot Phillips twice in the back, apparently to prevent him from testifying. Clark was sentenced to life in prison, and Phillips was eventually able to walk again. In 2008, Indigenous Canadian man Brian Sinclair went to the hospital because of a blocked catheter. After many hours passed in the waiting area, other patients began to urge medical staff to attend to Sinclair, who was clearly in pain, but they responded that they were helping other patients and would eventually get to him. After 34 hours had passed, Sinclair ended up dying in the waiting room and had already developed rigor mortis by the time medical staff attended to him. Turns out he had a very treatable bladder infection and could have easily been saved. When Jimi Hendrix was 16, his mother died from a ruptured spleen at the young age of 33. But Jimmy's father didn't allow him or his brother to attend the funeral. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey and told them that this was how men should deal with a loss. After several hours of drinking on board a ferry, Englishwoman Emma Blackwell fell to her death. She'd apparently been imitating Kate Winslet's pose from the Titanic movie and lost her footing before plummeting from the ship. Smile mask syndrome is a psychological condition characterized by prolonged unnatural smiling. It can lead to painful strain of the facial muscles and result in an inability to stop smiling even when agitated or upset. In 1993, Missouri man James Scott damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres, and the 23-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison for intentionally causing a catastrophe. The Babushka Lady was the name given to an unidentified person who was present at JFK's assassination in 1963. He or she was seen filming before and after the president was shot in the head, but later disappeared into the crowd. That recording may have been crucial in revealing the truth about JFK's killing, but the person has never come forward with the footage. Austrian Mayor Hans Steininger died in 1567 after breaking his neck by tripping on his own ridiculously long beard while running from a house fire. In 2010, a Russian man died after being voluntarily buried alive by his friends. He was simply trying to overcome his irrational fear of dying when the ground suddenly caved in and crushed him. In 2008, a British woman died in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Her husband admitted he would hook homemade clamps to the woman's nipples and administer electric shocks to turn her on. Apparently, it went a little too far this one time, and the woman was electrocuted to death. The husband was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to at least 20 years in prison. Muppets creator Jim Henson's death was made all the more tragic by how easily it could have been prevented. In May of 1990, he dismissed what seemed like mild flu-like symptoms, unaware that his body was actually under attack by a rare strain of Group A Streptococcus. The bacteria ravaged his lungs, filling them with blood and fluid as he slipped into septic shock. By the time he stumbled into the ER, several of his organs were already shutting down, as doctors described it as being hit by a freight train of bacteria. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Henson died at age 53, 20 hours after arriving at the hospital. Medical experts later said that if he had arrived just a few hours earlier, he likely would have survived. In a chilling discovery, archaeologists have found the first physical evidence of ancient Roman gladiators battling wild animals. An 1800-year-old skeleton in York, England, bearing lion bite marks on the pelvis. Excavated from Driffield Terrace, a site believed to be a gladiator cemetery, the remains belong to a man aged between 26 and 35. The bite marks on his pelvis showed no signs of healing, indicating that the injuries were most likely fatal. The gladiator was also found to have been decapitated, either as a ritual practice or mercy killing after the brutal mauling. Standout college basketball star Len Bias was drafted second overall in the 1986 NBA draft, hailed as a future legend and often likened to Michael Jordan for his explosive athleticism. But just 2 days later, while celebrating his selection with friends, Bias collapsed after snorting high-grade cocaine in a University of Maryland dorm room. He suffered a massive cardiac arrhythmia as his heart seized violently and he started convulsing. Despite the desperate attempts to revive him, Bias was pronounced dead within hours. His sudden drug-induced death sent shockwaves through the sports world, forever turning him into a tragic symbol of unrealized greatness. In 2010, 35-year-old Steve Carter made a startling discovery when he found an age-progressed image of himself on a missing children's website. Though he knew he was adopted, this led to the shocking discovery that he was actually Marks Barnes, a child that was abducted in Hawaii in 1977. When he was just a baby, his biological mother had kidnapped him during a custody dispute, changed both their identities, and raised him under a fake name. DNA tests confirmed his true identity, and after 34 years, he was reunited with his biological father, who had never stopped searching for him. According to a 1992 biography, before she was married to Ronald, Nancy Reagan was known around Hollywood for giving the best head. She was reportedly known as Just Say Yes Nancy and was very popular on the MGM lot for her glucking abilities. Napoleon Bonaparte apparently loved Stinky Beaver. On several occasions, he wrote to his lover instructing her not to wash up before he returned to her. The wife of U.S. President Benjamin Harrison died while he was in office in 1892. 4 years later, Harrison married his dead wife's much younger niece and had a daughter with her. His original adult children, who were around 40 years old at the time, were so disgusted by their father marrying their cousin that they didn't attend the wedding. Legendary artist Jackson Pollock died in a drunken car crash in 1956, along with his passenger Edith Metzger. Legend has it that Edith was found with Pollock's bitten-off wiener in her mouth. In the late 1600s, a serial spanker used to terrorize the streets of London with his spanking tactics. Nicknamed Whipping Tom, the man would assault unaccompanied women by lifting their dresses and spanking their butts while yelling, "Spanko!" Vigilantes dressed as women started patrolling areas where he was known to strike. At least 70 attacks were carried out before Thomas Wallace was captured and confessed to the spankings. When Blackbeard blockaded Charleston Harbor in 1718, he wasn't seeking gold but instead demanded mercury. Up until the 20th century, it was widely believed that injecting mercury into the urethra was a cure for syphilis. After a long stay in the brothels of Barbados, most of the men in Blackbeard's fleet were infested with STDs. Thus, Blackbeard captured Charleston Harbor to try and make his male parts feel better. The first ever reliable pregnancy test involved injecting a woman's urine into the skin of a female African clawed frog. If the woman was pregnant, the frog would lay eggs within a few hours. William the Conqueror smashed his nuts so hard on his horse's saddle that it gave him an awful infection which he died from a few weeks later. Priests later tried to force his body into a stone coffin that was far too small, causing his corpse to effectively explode. In the 19th century, doctors would perform pelvic massages to treat hysteria in women. Essentially, women would be finger-banged until they reached hysterical paroxysm, aka climax. But these treatments were often time-consuming and gave many doctors carpal tunnel, thus the vibrator was born. A 42-year-old Russian fisherman was viciously attacked by a bear in 2014, but his life was spared when the ringtone his granddaughter installed onto his phone suddenly went off. Justin Bieber's song Baby miraculously sent the bear running back into the woods. During World War I, a 17-year-old British soldier's life was saved when his pocket Bible stopped a bullet. The book has been passed down through his family and still has the bullet embedded inside. The man who discovered the 5,000-year-old mummy Ötzi the Iceman would also end up being found dead frozen in ice 13 years later. A Reddit user from California was gaming in his room when a stray bullet suddenly went through his window and struck him in the head. But he was miraculously saved by his Razer headset, which prevented the bullet from piercing his skull. In 2015, a dying fisherman told his two buddies to use his ashes as bait mix. 3 weeks after he died, his friends used his ashes to reel in this 180-pound monster carp, one of the largest ever caught. Known for his legendary role of Cousin Eddie in the National Lampoon's vacation movies, American actor Randy Quaid has faced a bevy of legal issues over the years. In 2009, he and his wife Evie were arrested for allegedly using a fake credit card to pay a $10,000 hotel bill. The next year, the couple was arrested again after spending 5 days in a guest house on a property they once owned in Cali. Facing felony vandalism charges, they fled to Canada seeking asylum, claiming they were gonna be murdered by a group of Hollywood star whackers. The couple was later detained by Canadian immigration officials but eventually released. They now permanently reside in Burlington, Vermont, and still maintain that they were victims of a dark Hollywood conspiracy. During the 2014 filming of Muppets Most Wanted, Danny Trejo's mom suddenly passed away. The actor managed to hold it together when everyone on set gave him their condolences. But when Kermit the Frog offered his own sympathies, Trejo ran to the bathroom bawling his eyes out. An Italian mafia hitman named Edgardo Greco killed 2 mob rivals with a crowbar before fleeing to France. He went on the run for more than 30 years until he was discovered working as a prestigious pizza chef. Greco's food became so famous thanks to his homemade recipes that he was featured in the local newspaper, resulting in his cover being blown. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school. In 1999, police were called to Matthew McConaughey's Texas home after his neighbor reported loud music and disturbances. When they arrived, ossifers found the actor playing the bongos while blazed out of his skull and completely naked. He was arrested for possession of marijuana. Many historians believe that the crotch part of medieval armor was enlarged not to make the knight's junk look bigger, but to prevent the pain caused by syphilis when their genitals rubbed against the metal. During the Cold War, the CIA highly considered using condoms as a weapon against Russia. They wanted to drop extra-large condoms that were labeled small on Soviet territory to lower their morale, but the plan was eventually scrapped. In February of last year, famed adult star Emily Willis was left permanently disabled after a health crisis at the facility that was treating her ketamine addiction. She'd reportedly been clean for several days when her health began to rapidly decline, and the rehab center allegedly failed to provide her with the proper care. Willis was barely eating or drinking while suffering from severe headaches, anxiety, night terrors, and a UTI. She eventually suffered a heart attack and wasn't taken to the hospital quickly enough, forcing paramedics to perform CPR for more than 30 minutes, resulting in oxygen deprivation and irreversible brain damage. Willis entered a vegetative state for 2 months and now suffers from locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient is conscious but can't move any muscles except those that control eye movements. Her family is now suing the rehab center, alleging medical negligence, inadequate supervision, and delayed emergency intervention, which they claim led to her awful permanent condition. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. In 2013, well-respected meteorologist Tim Samaras became the first storm chaser killed by a tornado along with his son Paul and friend Carl. The Oklahoma tornado expanded from 1 mile to 2.6 miles in about 30 seconds and was the largest ever recorded. It suddenly took a sharp turn towards the group, leaving them screaming their last words over the radio, "We're gonna die." These were the final photos of extreme cave diver Dave Shaw just moments before his final dive into South Africa's Bushman's Hole. He blacked out at 872 feet while retrieving a fellow diver's body, and his helmet cam recorded his demise. Osama bin Laden's son Omar was severely beaten by his father for smiling too widely when he was a young boy. He trained in Al-Qaeda camps starting at 14 years old, but left the terrorist organization in 2000 since he didn't support the idea of killing innocent civilians. In 2006, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. This is why you should never make eye contact with a gorilla. The average silverback gorilla is 4 to 9 times stronger than the average human male. They can deadlift 1,800 pounds, and their grip can crush the skull of a crocodile. Luckily, gorillas in captivity and in the wild have been known to be very peaceful creatures that will only attack when provoked. But this doesn't mean there haven't been a few isolated cases of stupid people pushing their luck. In 2007, a woman frequently visited Germany's Rotterdam Zoo and spent a lot of time smiling at the male gorilla Bokito. Zoo employees warned her many times about making eye contact with him, since greater apes typically interpret eye contact as a display of aggression. But the woman claimed she and Bokito shared a special bond, so she ignored these warnings. Until one day, Bokito decided he had enough when some kids were throwing rocks at him, so he leaped over the water ditch that separated him from visitors. He immediately went straight for the woman and brutally attacked her, dragging her around for hundreds of feet and inflicting numerous broken bones as well as more than 100 bite wounds. The woman narrowly survived the attack, spending months in the hospital and undergoing several reconstructive surgeries. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school. While working on the Nevermind album, there were concerns that the naked baby on the cover might be considered too inappropriate. In response, Kurt Cobain reportedly joked that he'd slap a sticker over the baby's genitals reading, "If you're offended by this, you must be a closet pedophile." The label was uneasy, but Cobain stood firm in his refusal to change it, turning a potential PR nightmare into one of the most iconic album covers in rock history. Decades later, Spencer Eldon, the nude baby featured on the cover, sued the band in 2021 at the age of 30, claiming that the image constituted child sexual exploitation and caused him lifelong emotional distress. Ironically, Eldon had fully embraced the fame in the past, recreating the photo multiple times, even nude, signing autographs, and getting a Nevermind tattoo. His lawsuit, seeking $150,000 from each defendant, was widely criticized and ultimately dismissed the next year due to the statute of limitations. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called a chromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all three cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Why? In 2001, a 6-year-old boy was undergoing a routine MRI scan in New York after surgery to remove a brain tumor. While he was sedated inside the machine, a metal oxygen tank was accidentally brought into the MRI suite, where the powerful magnetic field violently pulled it across the room. The tank struck the boy in the head with devastating force, fracturing his skull and causing brain injuries that were fatal. Jeremy Renner's snowplow accident in January 2023 proved to be even more graphic than initially reported. While attempting to assist a stranded vehicle near his home, he was suddenly pulled under his 14,000-pound snowplow, which crushed his body with so much force that he later recalled hearing the crunching of his own bones. Renner sustained 38 broken bones, a collapsed lung, severe cranial trauma, and required extensive reconstruction with metal plates in his chest, legs, and face. Among the most horrifying details he later revealed was that the impact had dislodged his left eyeball so severely that he could see it sticking out with his right eye. Despite the injuries, Renner remained conscious throughout the ordeal, fully aware of his condition, and at one point attempted to write what he believed would be his final words to his family. The actor has since regained much of his physical function, thanks largely to his daughter's support and his own relentless determination to continue living. During a match in Germany in 1993, star tennis player Monica Seles was stabbed in the back with a 9-inch kitchen knife by Günter Parch, an obsessed fan of her rival Steffi Graf. Parch was infuriated that Seles had overtaken Graf as the #1 player in the world, and admitted that he wanted to injure Seles so severely that she couldn't play tennis for a long time. Following the attack, Seles took a 2-year hiatus from pro tennis and never fully regained her prior dominance. The attacker received a suspended sentence with probation and psychological treatment, a verdict that sparked widespread outrage across the sports world. In 2019, a French man accidentally killed his friend during a fight and in a panic stuffed his body under his mattress. To avoid suspicion, he slept on it for nearly 2 years while regularly spraying air fresheners and bug repellent to mask the stench. He was eventually caught when the odor became overwhelming for his neighbors. In 1984, California man David Burke was fired from his airline job for a petty theft, so he smuggled a loaded gun onto the flight, shot the pilots mid-air, and deliberately crashed the plane into the ground, killing all 43 passengers on board. Investigators later found a note in his pocket addressed to his former boss stating, "I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none." Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. In one of the most horrifying cases of human captivity, Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter Elizabeth in a hidden basement beneath their Austrian home for 24 years, beginning in 1984. He repeatedly tortured and raped her, fathering 7 of her children, 3 of whom were raised in the underground dungeon without ever seeing daylight. The space was initially built as a bomb shelter and had no windows, was soundproofed, and could only be accessed through a series of hidden electronically locked doors that Fritzl installed himself. The monster kept up a front by convincing authorities and his wife that Elizabeth had joined a cult, even forging letters to support the lie. But the case was exposed in 2008 when one of the captive children fell critically ill and was brought to a hospital, prompting an investigation. Fritzl was arrested, convicted of many awful crimes, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The dungeon was later sealed with concrete, while Elizabeth and her surviving children were placed under new identities. This photo, taken in 1995, shows a young boy carrying his dog while crossing the infamous Sniper Alley in Bosnia. During a 4-year-long siege of the capital, Serbian snipers targeted civilians to instill terror among the population. The siege resulted in the deaths of over 11,500 people, including more than 1,600 children, and left tens of thousands wounded. Children were shot while riding bikes, fetching water, or simply staring out the window, turning daily life into a death lottery. The boy's fate after this photograph was taken remains unknown. In 1994, British Parliament member Stephen Milligan was found dead in his London home under bizarre and scandalous circumstances. His body was partially dressed in women's lingerie with a plastic bag over his head, a cord around his neck, and a slice of orange in his mouth. His death was ruled as accidental, likely the result of autoerotic asphyxiation. Around 5000 BC, a man sat down in the harsh climate of Chile's Atacama Desert and has remained in that position ever since. The extreme dryness of the region naturally mummified the remains, leaving the skin, hair, and clothing astonishingly intact after more than 7,000 years. In other words, he's been chilly in there for a long time. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. In the late 1800s, long before the invention of discrete vibrators, early models were massive mechanical contraptions powered by steam, hand cranks, or foot pedals. These devices were used by doctors to treat what was then diagnosed as female hysteria, a vague and outdated condition believed to cause anxiety, irritability, and sexual frustration. Rock Bitch, a provocative all-women British rock band infamous for their wildly sexualized live shows, had a notorious ritual during their concerts. They'd hurl a golden condom into the crowd, and whoever caught it, regardless of gender, was chosen to join them backstage for a night of uninhibited sexual escapades with the band. A 2003 study found that roughly 1 in 200 men globally share a nearly identical Y chromosome, all tracing back to one common male ancestor who lived about 800 years ago in the Mongol Empire region. The researchers linked this genetic legacy to Genghis Khan, giving the timing, geography, and his notorious reputation for spreading his seed like wildfire across his vast empire. In 2005, Thomas Montgomery, a 46-year-old married man from New York, created an online persona named Tommy, presenting himself as an 18-year-old Marine. Using this catfish, he began an online relationship with a 17-year-old girl from West Virginia named Jessie. But Montgomery's coworker, 22-year-old Brian Barrett, also became involved with Jessie online. When Jessie started shifting her attention to Barrett without him having to catfish her, Montgomery became consumed with jealousy. Eventually, Montgomery ambushed Barrett in their workplace parking lot and shot him 3 times with a military-style rifle, with one bullet piercing his neck as he sat in his car. Tommy was later arrested and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving 20 years in prison. But the story didn't stop there. In a final shocking twist, it was revealed that the teen girl they'd both been obsessed with was actually a 45-year-old housewife who was using her daughter's photos to catfish men online. 2021, Toronto firefighter Danny Flippidis mysteriously disappeared while on a ski trip in New York. 6 days later, he resurfaced 3,000 miles away in Sacramento, California, with no memory of how he got there. He was wearing the same exact ski gear as when he disappeared, but with no ID except for a credit card. Under intense pressure to succeed, Canadian woman Jennifer Penn deceived her parents for over a decade, leading them to believe she was a successful pharmacist despite never even graduating high school. When her lies finally began to unravel, she had her parents murdered by a hitman. Here are some morbid facts that you didn't know about Jeffrey Epstein. In 1974, Epstein began teaching for teenagers at the Dalton School in New York despite lacking a college degree. He allegedly displayed inappropriate behavior toward underage female students at the time, often flirting with them and even attending parties where young students were drinking. Within 5 years of being dismissed from his position at the school, Epstein founded his own consulting firm. But it's unclear as to how he rose to such enormous power as a financier in such short time. Many believe it was a combination of Ponzi schemes and working with corrupt people and governments. In the 1980s, he reportedly told certain people that he was an intelligence agent and had multiple fake identities. He has been widely called a billionaire, but Forbes disputes this claim, saying that he was more likely worth a fraction of that. Epstein once told a New York Times reporter that he had dirt on many powerful people, including information about their sexual proclivities and recreational drug use. His long list of powerful acquaintances includes Bill Clinton, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Gates, and Prince Andrew. Epstein reportedly had cameras literally everywhere on his properties. Maria Farmer, an artist who worked for Epstein in 1996, claimed that Jeffrey showed her a media room in his New York mansion, where several men were monitoring the surveillance footage throughout the house. She was quoted saying, "There were men sitting here in the room, and I looked on the cameras and I saw toilet, toilet, bed, bed, toilet, bed." It was very obvious that they were monitoring very private moments. Maria was also the first person to file a report on Epstein, after she and her sister were both sexually assaulted by Jeffrey and Ghislaine in 1996. Annie Farmer claimed that Epstein had groped, harassed, and crawled into bed with her, whereas Ghislaine had given her an inappropriate topless massage. The girls reported the assaults within months of them happening, but the authorities took no action. In 2002, the girls shared their stories with a writer at Vanity Fair, but it was never published. According to the editor, Epstein had pressured him to terminate the story by mailing him ominous signals, including a bullet in the head of a cat. Morbid facts. In 1963, President George W. Bush's future wife Laura ran a stop sign and struck another car when she was 17 years old. This resulted in the death of a boy who happened to be Laura's ex-boyfriend and a high school star athlete. She was never charged for the fatal incident. In 2020, 68-year-old actress Anna Obregon lost her only son to cancer when he was only 27 years old. After her son's death, she used his frozen sperm to fulfill her wish of having a granddaughter who she's now raising as her own daughter. In 1986, pro wrestler Kerry Von Erich was in a bad motorcycle accident that nearly ended his life. He had surgery to repair his right foot, but walked on it too early afterwards, forcing doctors to amputate it. But he continued wrestling while secretly wearing a prosthetic, even showering in his boots so that nobody would find out his secret. While filming Black Panther and other Marvel movies, Chadwick Boseman was secretly undergoing intensive treatment for stage 3 colon cancer, enduring surgeries and constant chemotherapy between shoots. Even most of the cast and crew had no idea that Chadwick was sick. He kept his diagnosis completely private, sharing it only with a small circle of family, his producing partner, and a few close confidants. Despite the pain and exhaustion, Boseman still continued to visit children with cancer at St. Jude's Hospital. Many of the kids he visited passed away before Chadwick did, never knowing that their hero was also fighting the same battle. In November of 1990, Life magazine published this haunting photo of AIDS activist David Kirby on his deathbed, surrounded by his grieving family in an Ohio hospital. Captured by photographer Therese Frere, the image became known as the photo that changed the face of AIDS. It humanized the epidemic at a time when stigma and fear were rampant, showing the devastating personal toll of the disease. With his family's consent, the photo was shared globally, sparking empathy, outrage, and awareness, ultimately helping to shift the public perception of AIDS. In 2014, comedian Tracy Morgan was critically injured in a car crash on the New Jersey Turnpike when a Walmart tractor-trailer suddenly slammed into his limo van. The collision killed his close friend and fellow comedian James McNair and left Morgan with a broken femur, broken ribs, broken nose, and a traumatic brain injury. Doctors initially feared he might not survive, and he remained in a coma for over a week. The truck driver had reportedly been awake for more than 24 hours, prompting Morgan to sue Walmart for negligence. The company ultimately settled the lawsuit outside of court, and Tracy has publicly forgiven the driver. In 1980, a man named John Burgess, who had lost over $750,000 while gambling, attempted to extort money from Harvey's Resort Hotel in Nevada by planting one of the most sophisticated homemade bombs the FBI had ever seen. Disguised as a copy machine and weighing over 1,000 pounds, the device was placed on the second floor of the casino along with a ransom note demanding $3 million. The FBI evacuated the building and spent hours trying to disarm the bomb, but when they attempted to disable it using a controlled charge, the entire device detonated. The explosion damaged much of the building and caused over $18 million in damage, but miraculously no one was killed. Burgess was later arrested, convicted, and died while in prison. Ted Cassidy, best known for playing Lurch in the original Addams Family, was 6 feet 9 inches tall. He died from a botched surgery to remove a tumor from his heart, which resulted from the condition of acromegaly that caused his iconic voice, facial structure, and towering height. After leasing the World Trade Center just weeks before 9/11, Larry Silverstein filed an insurance claim arguing that the attacks on the Twin Towers constituted two separate terrorist events, entitling him to double the $3.5 billion per occurrence payout. The case went to court, where the court agreed with Silverstein for 9 of the 20 insurance companies, forcing them to pay double. In total, Silverstein received around $4.55 billion for the collapse of the World Trade Center. In 1991, 5 young boys vanished while searching for salamander eggs on a mountain in South Korea, earning them the nickname the Frog Boys. Despite a massive nationwide search, their remains weren't discovered until 2002, just a few miles from where they disappeared. Initially ruled as deaths by exposure, an autopsy revealed that 4 boys had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and 1 had a gunshot wound. Even more unsettling, their clothes were found tied together with bullets wrapped in them. The site was suspiciously close to a military training zone, but police refused to investigate any military involvement. No one has been held accountable to this day. Mexican painter Frida Kahlo's life was a haunting mix of brilliance and suffering. After contracting polio at age 6, classmates called her Frida the Cripple. At 18, she was nearly killed when a steel handrail impaled her during a bus crash, entering through her pelvis and exiting her abdomen. Her spine, pelvis, collarbone, and foot were completely shattered. She endured over 30 brutal surgeries, spent months in body casts, and painted while bedridden. Frida later suffered 5 to 7 miscarriages as a result, with one nearly killing her from blood loss, and she captured the horror in disturbing works like Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself naked, bleeding, and surrounded by a floating fetus and surgical tools. Later on, gangrene took her leg, only deepening her depression. She filled her diary with dark images and wrote, "I am not sick, I am broken." Though officially ruled a pulmonary embolism, many believe she intentionally at 47. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope to never return." July 17, 2025, Felix Baumgartner, the daredevil who once broke the sound barrier by jumping from the edge of space, was killed in a tragic paragliding crash in Italy at the age of 56. While piloting a motorized paraglider near a seaside resort, he reportedly may have suffered a cardiac event mid-air, causing the craft to spiral out of control before slamming into the hotel's pool area. The impact killed him instantly and injured a hotel worker with flying debris, sending her to the hospital with neck trauma, but she appears to be okay. Witnesses described a terrifying boom as the glider hit, followed by screams from stunned vacationers. Paramedics arrived quickly but were unable to revive him, and guests at the hotel were left stunned as rescue workers covered his body with a tarp near the wreckage. Hours before the fatal crash, he posted an Instagram story with the caption, "Too much wind," his eerie final message before the legendary thrill-seeker met a brutal end while doing what he loved. In 2017, retired U.S. Army Colonel David Will Riggins was awarded $8.4 million in a defamation lawsuit after a woman publicly accused him of raping her decades earlier when they were cadets at West Point. Just as Riggins was being considered for promotion as Brigadier General, the accusation was posted on a blog, effectively derailing his military career. But an investigation soon found no supporting evidence, and a Virginia jury later determined the woman's claims were provably false. Although the final payout was reduced to around $2.3 million, Riggins said he was grateful to have his name cleared, even if the damage to his career couldn't be undone. In 2013, Caleb McGilvery, aka Kai the hatchet-wielding hitchhiker, went viral after a wild TV interview where he described stopping an attacker with a hatchet, shouting, "Smash! Smash! Smash!" But just a few months later, he was arrested for the murder of 73-year-old lawyer Joseph Galfy in New Jersey. Galfy was found beaten to death in his own home, as Kai had reportedly punched, kicked, and stomped him until he died. Kai claimed it was self-defense after being drugged and sexually assaulted, but prosecutors said there was no evidence in his favor. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2019 and sentenced to 57 years in prison. In 2014, Jose Salvador Alvarenga was rescued after surviving 438 days lost at sea, a journey that began when his fishing boat was blown off course in Mexico. He drifted over 6,000 miles across the Pacific in a small boat, surviving by eating raw fish, turtles, and seabirds, while drinking rainwater, turtle blood, and his own pee. When he finally washed ashore in the Marshall Islands, he was sunburnt, emaciated, and clutching a knife in terror. Though his story was initially met with skepticism, experts later confirmed it was entirely plausible, setting the record for the longest solo survival at sea by far. In July of 2023, Australian woman Erin Patterson invited her ex-in-laws and their relatives over for lunch, serving them a homemade beef Wellington laced with one of the deadliest fungi on Earth, death cap mushrooms. Within a few days, 3 of them were dead from agonizing organ failure, and a fourth barely survived after a liver transplant. Patterson claimed it was a tragic accident, but investigators found damning evidence, including a food dehydrator tied to the poison and inconsistent stories about where the mushrooms came from. She was recently convicted of 3 counts of murder and likely faces life in prison. In the mid-1800s, women across the Western world wore massive crinolines, hoop skirts that ballooned outward in all directions, often made from highly flammable fabrics like cotton. The size made them elegant but deadly. They caught fire easily near candles or fireplaces, and the sheer width made them nearly impossible to escape the flames. Within just 2 months in 1863, 19 English women burnt to death after their dresses caught fire. By the end of the decade, more than 3,000 people had died as a result of crinoline fires. What producers got away with on Fear Factor was nothing short of insane. Contestants were fed blended rats, pig rectums, maggots, and even drank donkey semen and urine in a notorious episode so vile that NBC refused to air it. Injuries were common, with some participants hospitalized for stunts that went wrong, one nearly dying from hypothermia after being submerged in ice water, while others were left with concussions, whiplash, and long-term psychological trauma. Host Joe Rogan later admitted the show became absolutely insane, as producers escalated the torture for ratings, ignoring the visible misery of their contestants. Animal rights groups slammed the show for cruelty, as live insects were eaten, snakes were abused, and rats were used in disturbing stunts, all for cheap thrills. Despite its grotesque popularity, Fear Factor was finally canceled twice, with the second cancellation triggered by the infamous Semen Challenge, which many people saw as the moment reality TV officially lost its soul. In 2019, Daniela Lace left a Marilyn Manson concert in Ontario while heavily intoxicated and drove the wrong way down a residential street, crashing into a home and rupturing a gas line. 15 minutes later, the house exploded, destroying 4 homes, injuring 7 people including first responders, and causing an estimated $10 to $15 million in damage. Lace was sentenced to 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to impaired driving causing bodily harm. In a bizarre twist, she and her father later sued the concert venue's alcohol vendor, claiming they were responsible for overseeing her and allowing her to drive drunk. The Bodies exhibit, which displays real human cadavers preserved through plastination, has long been shrouded in controversy due to allegations that many of the bodies were sourced from Chinese prisons without consent. Human rights groups believe that some of the corpses may belong to executed prisoners or political dissidents, including members of persecuted groups like Falun Gong. In 2008, the exhibit's parent company was forced to admit that it couldn't verify the origins of the bodies, posting a disclaimer that some remains may have come from Chinese prisoners. Visitors may unknowingly be viewing the dissected bodies of people who died under horrific conditions. In 2020, Canadian actor Ryan Grantham, known for his roles in Riverdale and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, shot and killed his 64-year-old mother while she was playing piano in their home, then filmed the aftermath on a GoPro. Grantham then packed his car with guns, ammunition, Molotov cocktails, and a map to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's residence, allegedly planning to assassinate him. But instead, he drove to a police station and turned himself in. During the trial, it was revealed that Grantham was suffering from severe depression and he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole in 14 years. In 1988, expert skydiver Ivan McGuire boarded a plane in North Carolina to film a routine jump from 10,000 feet. With over 800 jumps under his belt, he was calm, confident, and fully focused on capturing the perfect footage. His helmet camera recorded everything, his smooth exit from the plane, the free fall, and the other jumpers floating below. But partway through the descent, McGuire began frantically patting his back, expressing confusion that quickly turned to panic. Just seconds before impact, his voice can be heard yelling, "Oh my God, no!" He was apparently so focused on filming that he had jumped without a parachute. In 1999, skydiver Joan Murray's parachute malfunctioned, causing her to fall from 14,000 feet directly onto a mound of fire ants. But doctors think the shock of adrenaline from 200 fire ant stings kept her heart beating and saved her life. 112 people died during the construction of the Hoover Dam. The first to die was surveyor J.G. Tierney on December 20th, 1922. On the same exact day, 14 years later, the last person died during construction. It was J.G.'s son, Patrick Tierney. In 1979, Elvita Adams tried to cease her own existence by plummeting from the Empire State Building. She leapt from the 86th floor but was blown back onto the 85th floor by a sudden strong gust of wind. In 1991, a woman from Thailand accidentally slipped in the mud, grabbed a live wire, and was electrocuted to death. Later that same day, when her sister was showing the neighbors how the accident happened, she slipped, grabbed the same live wire, and was electrocuted to death. The great Harry Houdini once escaped a prison cell while fully nude to show that he wasn't hiding anything to help his escape. But the guards who checked him apparently failed to fully inspect him, since Houdini was hiding the key up his chocolate starfish. Pubic wigs known as merkins were worn by prostitutes as early as the 15th century. The purpose for this accessory was that pubic hair was once considered popular and attractive, but sex workers often shaved their lower parts to avoid pubic lice, and these merkins also helped them cover up signs of STDs from their clients. Early colonizers of the United States commonly used corn cobs as toilet paper, since they were soft, plentiful, and the grooves were quite efficient at getting the job done. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus was only 14 when he assumed power and would often prostitute himself in taverns and brothels. He would frequently stand around naked while swinging his ding-a-ling, and would offer vast sums of money to any doctor who could give him a vagina. He was killed at age 19, and his only positive legacy was the invention of the whoopee cushion, which he would use on unsuspecting dinner guests. Lauren Kreitzer was broke, depressed, and disabled after losing his leg in a car accident in 2007. But one day he saw a blanket valued at $500,000 on Antiques Roadshow and realized he had the exact same blanket. It was a Navajo blanket from the 1800s that he ended up selling for $1.5 million and quickly turned his life around. In 2010, Mexican singer Sergio Vega publicly denied a news report that he'd been murdered. 1 hour later, he was murdered. In 2001, Jason and Jenny Cairns Lawrence went on vacation in New York City when the World Trade Center was struck on 9/11. 4 years later, in 2005, they went on vacation in London when 4 suicide bombers attacked the London bus network, killing 52 people. Then in 2008, they were in Mumbai when once again, the city was attacked by 10 different terrorists who killed nearly 200 people. All 3 tragedies were the worst terrorist attacks in history for each of those countries. And now Jason and Jenny just stay home. When he was in high school, comedian Kevin James was a beast at wrestling. He was the top-ranked wrestler at his school, even ahead of his friend and future wrestling superstar Mick Foley, who was ranked second. The two would often face each other in practice as wrestling partners, and Kevin won most of the time. Foley says that when they were teenagers, James was the toughest kid in school, and one of the only kids he knew who could bench press 300 pounds. But Kevin's wrestling dream came to an end when he suffered a severe back injury, allowing Foley to take his spot as the top-ranked wrestler and launch his career of wrestling stardom. James then pushed for a football career until another injury took him out, so he instead settled for a life as a millionaire comedian. The first karaoke machine was built by Japanese nightclub musician Daisuke Inaoi in 1971, but he didn't patent his invention because he wanted to teach the world to sing. He earned nothing from the billion-dollar industry he created and says he has no regrets to this day. A Confederate soldier named John Pemberton was stabbed in the chest during the American Civil War. His efforts to control his resulting chronic pain led to a bad addiction to morphine. Attempting to break this habit, Pemberton started mixing various painkillers with carbonated water and soon developed what would become the most well-known product in the world, Coca-Cola. The original recipe contained cocaine and alcohol and did nothing to curb Pemberton's morphine addiction. 6. Victor Hugo, author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was a raging sex addict. After his wife got tired of having intercourse with him up to 9 times per day, he slept with so many prostitutes that on the day he died, all the brothels in Paris were closed because so many prostitutes took the day off to mourn him. 2 million people attended his funeral, and Paris experienced a mini baby boom 9 months later. In case you need a few reasons to feel thankful for your mom, these are some of the worst mothers of all time. Suffering from severe postpartum psychosis in 2001, Andrea Yates methodically drowned her 5 children one by one in the family bathtub. She believed she was saving them from eternal damnation and was committed to a mental asylum for the rest of her life. Over a 14-year span, Mary Beth Tinning's children kept dying mysteriously, 9 of them in total. The cause of death for the first few was thought to be genetic, but it was later revealed she had smothered most of them to gain sympathy and attention. In 1983, Diane Downs shot her 3 children in cold blood, killing one and paralyzing another, simply because the man she was dating didn't like kids. She then drove them to the hospital slowly while her children were screaming in agony beside her. Blanche Monier's mother imprisoned her in a windowless room for 25 years, simply because she fell in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Under her mother's control, Blanche was kept in darkness, starved, and left to rot in her own filth, until authorities discovered her in 1901 weighing just 55 pounds and barely clinging on to life. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman secretly gave birth to 7 infants and killed each one immediately after birth, hiding the tiny bodies in cardboard boxes in her garage. Her family discovered them years later, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter Hildegard as an experiment to create the perfect human. Hildegard became a prodigy, reading at age 2, speaking 4 languages by 8, and entering law school by the age of 13. But when she eventually sought independence as an adult, Aurora declared the experiment a failure and shot her daughter in her sleep. She later said the sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it. She spent most of her 26-year sentence in a mental asylum. Morbid facts. A French woman was scammed out of 830,000 euros after falling for an elaborate scheme involving an AI-generated version of Brad Pitt. It began in 2023 when someone posing as Pitt's mother contacted her online, followed by Brad himself claiming he was battling kidney cancer and desperately needed financial help or else he was gonna die. He sent AI-generated hospital photos showing himself bruised and hooked up to machines. Over time, the woman was manipulated into believing they were in a secret relationship, one he swore had to be kept quiet because of restrictive Hollywood contracts. She even believed they were engaged and that he planned to move to France to marry her. She wired him thousands for fake medical bills and customs fees for luxury gifts that he sent her but never arrived. After her husband divorced her over the delusion, she sent the scammers 775,000 euros she received from the settlement. Despite repeated warnings, she insisted it was true love until she eventually realized she had thrown her entire life away for a fake person. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school. According to David Bowie's ex-wife Angela, she once walked in on David and Mick Jagger naked in bed together after a long night of partying. Angela took it as clear evidence of a sexual encounter, though neither Bowie nor Jagger ever confirmed it. Jagger dismissed the rumor as rubbish, while Bowie avoided commenting on it altogether. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. Juana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Barraza later confessed a deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Vlad the Impaler earned his name through the methodical terror he inflicted on his enemies. When the mighty Ottoman Empire invaded his territory in 1462, they were met with a nightmarish sight. A forest of 20,000 impaled corpses mounted on tall wooden stakes and left to rot beneath the scorching summer sun. The victims, captured soldiers, peasants, and anyone who defied Vlad, including children, were arranged with chilling precision, their decomposing bodies spreading a stench of death for miles. Upon seeing this grotesque display, Sultan Mehmed II was so disturbed that he ordered his army of 100,000 men to retreat. While filming Jackass number 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. Brailsford was charged with second-degree murder and found not guilty, since the full, unedited footage wasn't released until hours after his acquittal. Brailsford was rehired by the department and reimbursed for all the medical expenses he paid while seeking treatment for the PTSD he claimed he acquired from the shooting. Because of this, Brailsford was medically retired and now collects a $2,500 pension every month. Morbid Facts, Part 508. Right after purchasing some hot coffee from McDonald's in 2004, 79-year-old Stella Liebeck accidentally spilled it into her lap, causing horrific third-degree burns. The woman quickly went into shock and was hospitalized for 8 days while undergoing skin grafts. Since the burns were so bad, her lady parts had melted and fused to her legs. Stella suffered permanent disfigurement after the incident and was partially disabled for 2 years. She then sued McDonald's for making the coffee way too hot and was only seeking $20,000 to cover her medical bills. But McDonald's refused to settle with Stella as the media completely demonized her, calling her the poster child of frivolous lawsuits. However, people quickly changed their tune when photos of the horrific burns finally released. With one of the jurors being so traumatized, he forced his wife to quit drinking hot coffee. Stella ended up winning $2.9 million in damages from the lawsuit, but her life was never the same again. Martha Stewart once dated Anthony Hopkins, but broke it off with him after watching The Silence of the Lambs. She says she couldn't separate Hopkins from his cannibalistic character, Hannibal Lecter. RFK's assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, is still alive today and has been denied parole 17 times. According to historians, we would have a lot more Egyptian mummies intact today if so many of them weren't eaten during the Victorian era. People used to believe that the ground-up corpses of ancient Egyptians could cure different ailments. Harvey Weinstein reportedly had gangrene around his private area, giving his shaft a Frankenstein look that appeared as if it was chopped off and sewn back on. His ghoulies were also removed during treatment of his gangrene, leading to several of his victims suspecting that he was intersex. When Roman Emperor Commodus was in power, he had his men gather all the dwarves and disabled people they could find around the city. They were brought to the Colosseum, where each of them was given a meat cleaver and forced to fight to the death. Morbid Facts. Known for her role in Throw Mama from the Train, actress Anne Ramsey was in severe pain during the entire production. She had parts of her tongue and jaw removed during surgery for throat cancer, resulting in her slurred speech throughout the movie. She was nominated for an Oscar 6 months before dying of the cancer. Ant corpses release a chemical when they die that tells the other ants in the colony to dispose of them. In the 1950s, a Harvard scientist once recreated this chemical and dropped it on a live ant. Its ant friends kept carrying it to the graveyard no matter how much it struggled to return. The original owner of Macy's, Isidore Straus, and his wife Ida both died on the Titanic. The husband had a chance to join his wife on a lifeboat, but stayed behind to give his spot to a child. Refusing to leave her husband behind, Ida decided to leave the lifeboat as well. They were last seen holding hands on the deck and were portrayed in the movie as the couple who were embracing each other as the ship went down. Morbid Facts. Here's a 2006 photo of Mike Tyson shaking the hand of Dale Hausner, a Phoenix serial killer who took the lives of 8 people via drive-by shootings in the mid-2000s. A few days after Tyson met up with Hausner, who was pretending to be a sports writer, police showed up at the gym and informed Mike about Hausner's awful crimes. The boxer later said he never suspected anything wrong with Hausner, describing him as a nice little guy. An 8-year-old girl once found a 4-leaf clover and gave it to her dad for good luck. When her father died, she found out he kept it in his pocket every day for 20 straight years. In 2017, Las Vegas police arrested Shane Schindler, the prime suspect in the sledgehammer murders of 2 homeless men. Police set up a sting operation in which they disguised a mannequin as a homeless man and left it on the street. The photo on the right shows Schindler bashing the mannequin with a sledgehammer, thus proving he was the killer. Dennis Rodman was once on a cruise with his girlfriend when they wanted to try something different in bed. So she suggested for Dennis to run and jump inside of her while she was laying down unclothed. This resulted in Dennis shattering his member and pouring blood all over the bed. It was the first of 3 times that he would break his pecker, since once you break it the first time, it becomes way easier to break again. In 2009, escaped spree robber Jeffrey Manchester built a secret hideout inside of a Toys R Us. He lived there for 6 months, surviving off of kid snacks and watching DVDs to pass the time. In September of 1983, Soviet military officer Stanislav Petrov received a message that the US had launched 5 nuclear missiles that were headed for Moscow. He could have launched a retaliatory strike, but refused to because his gut instinct said it was a false alarm. Turns out the computer detection system was simply malfunctioning, and he had saved the world from a nuclear war. Playboy model Anna Nicole Smith didn't receive a single penny when her 90-year-old billionaire husband died. Oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall never included her in his will and left his $1.6 billion estate to one of his sons. Anna was almost completely broke by the time she died of an accidental overdose in 2007. 17-year-old Liam Ashley's own parents pressed criminal charges against him for using their car without permission. They also refused to pay his bail so that he would be sent to prison and hopefully learn his lesson. While being transported in a prisoner van, Liam was viciously attacked by a dangerous offender and killed. Morbid Facts. Shelley Duvall said the amount of emotional trauma from filming The Shining was unbearable and excruciating. She was genuinely terrified while on set and often pulled clumps of her hair out in between takes. Due to the stress and torment that director Stanley Kubrick put her through, Shelley had a complete mental breakdown after the movie was filmed. The set of Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filled with 500 pounds of rotting animal corpses. The stench mixed with the heat caused actors to vomit constantly. The director said that by the last few days of filming, every time he yelled cut, the actors and crew would immediately puke. A group of psychologists studied 400 movies to find the most realistic psychopath, and the winner was Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. They said that he seems to be effectively invulnerable and resistant to any form of humanity or emotion. Popular characters Hannibal Lecter and Patrick Bateman didn't even make it in the top 25. In 2014, the incredibly preserved photograph of a young woman was found in the wreckage of the SS Central America, which sunk during a hurricane in 1857. The woman's identity is unknown, but the photo has been dubbed the Mona Lisa of the Deep. This is the earliest known depiction of Jesus Christ, scratched into a wall around 200 AD by someone who gave him a donkey's head to mock their friend for believing in Jesus. This is the only surviving handwriting of an ancient Roman emperor. It was written by Theodosius II around 430 AD and reads in Latin, "We desire that you be well." This is the only ancient Roman slave tag discovered that's still attached to its collar. Its inscription reads, "I have fled, seize me and return me to Xeninus for 1 gold coin." Here's a pictograph found at Barrier Canyon in the Utah desert depicting a humanoid with bug eyes and antennae. It's at least 2,500 years old. This is the only surviving example of a Ghiornia from the 15th century. This garb was a staple of Italian fashion in the 1400s, with this one belonging to Diego Cavaniglia, who died in 1481. Before it was found near his tomb in 2004, we only knew of gonorrheas through paintings and written records. Wonder Woman was created by a polyamorous male kinkster who was married to 2 bisexual women. The character was originally made to represent an overtly kinky sex symbol for women, and was nearly cancelled from the start because of how explicitly she was being depicted. The throuple was also heavily into bondage, which supposedly inspired Wonder Woman's rope. Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin Virginia when she was 13 years old and he was 27. The pair first met when Virginia was only 7 while Edgar was 21. Former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller suffered a heart attack and died while having intercourse with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70 years old at the time. Most famous for his 6 different marriages, King Henry VIII hired 4 men to regularly check his feces, monitor his bowel movements, and wipe his bottom. They were known as the grooms of the King's Stool, and all of them were eventually knighted. 2 years ago, 72-year-old Lillian Curtis pulled into a Denny's parking lot in Kentucky when a strong gust of wind suddenly knocked the Denny's sign over. It fell directly onto her car and crushed her, causing her to eventually die from blunt force injuries. In 1989, a Soviet jet fighter pilot mistakenly ejected just after takeoff from Poland. The aircraft continued flying for more than 500 miles on autopilot and ended up all the way in Belgium, only to crash into a house, killing a teenager. Near San Diego in 2022, a man died after crashing his car into a parked vehicle while driving rather slowly. Apparently, the knife he was using to mix protein powder while driving was propelled into his neck by the force of his airbag being deployed. In 2020, a Kansas man died after being shot by his dog in a freak hunting accident. He was sitting in the front seat of his pickup truck when his dog stepped on the trigger of his rifle in the back seat. In 1909, George Spencer Millett died in a freak accident while running away from 6 girls trying to give him kisses on his 15th birthday. He tripped and fell on an ink eraser in his front pocket that stabbed him in the heart. In 2011, a 49-year-old Russian woman had a heart attack and was pronounced dead. A few days later, she woke up at her own wake and was so shocked that she screamed and had another heart attack, this time dying for real.